Good morning to all of the football fans of the world. Welcome back to the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. And my name, of course, is Andrew Garrison. And on this show, we talk about football. We're going to start today with the UFL, but of course, obviously, there's this little league off in the distance that we like to call the NFL. We're going to talk all about that, college football as well. This is your place to be for all three of those leagues, organizations, whatever verbiage you want to use. The Early Bird Podcast is your place to be every single week, likely on Wednesday mornings, although I say that, and we're recording right now on a Tuesday morning, which is obviously not Wednesday, so maybe it comes out on Tuesdays, maybe it comes out on Thursdays, likely Wednesday mornings every single week, and we have a lot to talk about today. Last week, if you probably didn't listen last week, this is the first episode that I've publicized and really put out into the world, said, hey, this is happening. But last week, if you happened to listen, which based on the numbers you probably didn't, we talked about the XFL Conference. So the UFL is coming up as soon as, I believe, 5 days away. This Saturday, March 30th, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox, the Birmingham Stallions will travel to Arlington to play the Arlington Renegades. It's the USFL champion versus the XFL champion. There's a chance that you don't know what any of that means because there's a lot of people still that don't really know about the UFL, aren't really aware of the UFL, and don't know that we're going to have semi-professional football played this Saturday on Fox of all networks. Let me explain. Last year we had two spring leagues. We had the XFL and we had the USFL. The XFL ran from February to April, maybe May, and the USFL ran from April to June. I assume it was June. Could have been July, but pretty sure it ended in early June. Two spring leagues, right? It was a strange experience because you had 16 teams across the two leagues, right? 8 in each. The talent was very diffused. In my opinion, you don't have 16 starting quarterbacks in spring football. You have all the NFL quarterbacks. You have all the backup NFL quarterbacks. You have all the fringe roster cut NFL quarterbacks. And then you have a few spring football quarterbacks, really like quarterbacks 33 to 40 in the world, where you're not a starter in the NFL. Even further than that, honestly, it's probably quarterback 65 to 72, where you're not a starter, you're not a backup, you're not ingrained in the NFL, but you're still good enough to play a very high level of football, and that's where you have guys like Luis Perez, AJ McCarron, Jordan Ta'amu, the faces of the spring football leagues the last few years. But I don't think there's 16 of those guys. And I think that when you even look at receiver rooms, if you have 3 receivers on the field at a time, you don't have 48 or whatever 16 times 3 is. You don't have that number of starting caliber spring football players. And so the talent was very diffused. And it was a very strange situation where in the XFL, you had the Defenders who were amazing and fun to watch, the Battlehawks, the Renegades, of course, ended up being champions. But then on the flip side of that, you had the Orlando Guardians and the Vegas Vipers, who no one cared about because they were bad, they weren't fun to watch, they weren't exciting. There was nothing enticing about watching the Orlando Guardians play the Vegas Vipers. I remember them playing each other, actually, and I remember just looking at my TV like, I don't care. I just don't care. But what's nice about the UFL is you are taking only 4 teams from the XFL, not necessarily the 4 best, but it ends up being the 4 best because the 4 remaining XFL teams drafted the players that were sort of fallen by the wayside on the 4 teams that were left out of the UFL. Does that make sense? So the Orlando Guardians, for example, they, at least for the time being, they don't exist anymore. But Quinton Dormady, their starting quarterback at the beginning of the year, he still wants to play football, and he still needs a job in spring football. He was drafted by the San Antonio Brahmas, and he will likely be their starting quarterback in the spring, right? So it ends up being the best players, the cream of the crop of the XFL, 4 teams, and the same exact situation, the cream of the crop, the top of the USFL, their top 4 teams, and they're playing each other. They're all in one league. There's only 8 teams, which in my opinion is perfect. I think you can find 8 rosters of high-level spring football close enough to the NFL where at least in March, right, it suffices until we get to the NFL season. I expect it to be very fun to watch. I expect it to be very entertaining. I have no reason to think anything else. And we're going to talk all about the USFL Conference today. Last week, we talked about the XFL Conference. This week, we're going to talk about the USFL Conference. And then we're even going to go further than that. We're going to talk about the NFL. We just had free agency. There's a lot of news. There's a lot to go over. We're going to talk all about that today. But I want to start, as my computer falls asleep, I want to start with the Birmingham Stallions because the Birmingham Stallions are undeniably at least with the information we have right now, right? Technically, none of us know what we're talking about because we haven't seen any games yet. We're basing our information off of, these teams before the current iteration of this league that they're playing in even existed. But with the information we have right now, the Birmingham Stallions are undeniably the best team and the favorites to win the UFL in 2024. Last season, they won the USFL championship for a second year in a row. The USFL has existed it existed in the 80s, but besides that, in recent memory, the current iteration of the USFL, the Birmingham Stallions won both championships. They went 21-3 over the course of 2 seasons. That's regardless of who you're playing, what your competition is, that is complete and utter domination. 21-3 total record in both USFL seasons that we've seen in the past 2 years. They've been dominating everything. Now, with that said, the Stallions do lose their starting quarterback, Alex McGough. He's on the Green Bay Packers now. That's another aspect of the UFL that I find very fascinating, is the fact that the best players, right in the NFL, there's the roster turnover is largely, and I understand the fact that we just went through one of the most chaotic free agencies in history, but there usually isn't very much roster turnover, right? Once you find your franchise quarterback, that person is your franchise quarterback for a very long time. Aaron Rodgers was on the Green Bay Packers for a very long time. Tom Brady was on the Patriots for a very long time. When you have these great players that have longevity in the league, they're going to stay on your team for a very long time. But if you're someone like the Birmingham Stallions, it's almost a bittersweet moment because you have Alex McGough, you're dominating the USFL, but in the back of your mind, if you're a diehard Birmingham Stallions fan, in the back of mind the whole time you're thinking, he's going to go to the NFL. And we've seen that so many times. I could just start naming guys that were at the top of the league last year, producing at the highest level in the XFL or in the USFL. They're on NFL rosters now. And so it's almost like in college football where if you have a small school, I'm just going to pick on James Madison, where James Madison, great program. They move from FCS to FBS. They end up ranked in the AP poll for D1A in their first year being in that highest level of college football. And then they lose all their players. Now, of course, their coach ended up going to IU, and so that's partially why. But you see that a lot of times where some of these smaller schools will produce a ton of talent and have a ton of success, and then all of a sudden their talent leaves because they have better opportunities elsewhere. And this isn't a college football debate at this time. But the Birmingham Stallions and every other team in the UFL has to worry about the same things, where your best players, there's a pretty good chance they're going to the NFL. Now, sure, this happened to Jordan Ta'amu at least 3 times in his life, and this happened to Luis Perez. This happens to basically every top-level quarterback. All of the top-level quarterbacks in the UFL, or the USFL, the XFL, the AAF, whatever spring football league you want to talk about, they all try to go to the NFL, and usually it doesn't work out, unfortunately, because they're just barely outside that paper ceiling. They can't quite break through, and then they end up back in the spring league, which is why this works so perfectly, is because they can have their NFL season, and if they're not permanently on an NFL roster, if it's clear that they don't yet have longevity in the NFL, you can just turn around 3 months later and play in the UFL. Jordan Ta'amu and Luis Perez, the 2 best quarterbacks in the XFL Conference, as recently as 2 weeks ago announced they're going to play in the UFL. 3 weeks ago, the UFL looked a whole lot different, and now we have those guys back, but we do not have Alex McGough back at this time. And so that's the number one question we have to ask about the Birmingham Stallions is, are they going to be able to fill that role? And I have some huge alarm bells that I want to sort of ring over your head here, because there is a very strong potential, a very strong opportunity for the Birmingham Stallions to employ a 2-quarterback system. We saw that a little bit last season. We saw that a little bit more so 2 seasons ago. Alex McGough, he was a run-first quarterback. Jamar Smith was also very mobile, but he had a little bit more of a cannon of an arm. We saw that dichotomy. We saw them to complement one another and play a 2-quarterback system. Alex McGough got maybe 75% of the snaps, but there were drives where Jamar Smith would come in, and he would just play the whole drive. No matter what happens, no matter how well it's going, Jamar Smith's going to play the whole drive. There were times where maybe the Birmingham Stallions, maybe they get into the red zone and they say, okay, now we're switching back to McGough, or maybe we're switching back to Jamar Smith. We saw some semblance of a 2-quarterback system, and what's interesting is they have a very similar complementary quarterback room this season than they are compared to the one that they had last season. Alex McGough, run-first quarterback, he's gone now. Who could be a run-first quarterback that maybe is, behind Jamar Smith in the depth chart, but still very capable and still very competent? Adrian Martinez. And this is the part where I want to point out the fact that there are big name quarterbacks in this league. These are not just no names. You may not have heard of Jamar Smith, but you've probably, if you're a decent football fan and you're a reasonably in-depth college football fan, you know who Adrian Martinez is. From Kansas State, from Nebraska. He's could be more of a run-first complement to Holtz's head coach Skip Holtz, his scheme, and Adrian Martinez very well could fill Magoo's role. On top of that, Jamar Smith can run himself. I'm very, very positive that there's a high chance that we could see on Saturday 2 quarterbacks starting considerable reps for the Birmingham Stallions. Jamar Smith has an arm. He played for Skip Holtz in college and the last 2 years on the Stallions, so he knows the system very, very well. There's going to be no confusion, or at least there shouldn't be any confusion on Jamar Smith's side between him, his coach, and his receivers. Maybe it's a different story for Adrian Martinez. Adrian Martinez, he's another quarterback on here. I could very well see him starting. His accuracy and precision really helped Kansas State reach new heights of success. We could see the same thing with the Birmingham Stallions. If Jamar Smith is having a bad day throwing the ball and you need someone to come in and, make a 25-yard pass on 3rd and 15 to, set up a red zone opportunity late in the game, Adrian Martinez could be your guy. But for the Stallions, the quarterback talent does not end there because Jalen Morton was their 3rd pick in the dispersal draft in the 3rd round. Remember, the dispersal draft, that was where the 4 USFL teams that don't exist anymore, so that would be like the Pittsburgh Maulers, for example, their players were selected by the 4 remaining teams because you want, obviously, the best players in your league at all times. You want the best USFL players on the USFL conference rosters. Jalen Morton has a ton of potential. He's still the number 3 quarterback for now. The Stallions, you're starting to see why this team is so good. Those are your top 3 quarterbacks. All of them are at least competent enough to be backups, or if you're playing a 2-quarterback system, at least competent enough to garner maybe 35% of the snaps, we'll say. Adrian Martinez, he could be a starter. Jamar Smith is the starter, and he has been the starter, and he has had to fill that role when Alex Magoo has been hurt or maybe is just out for a drive in the past 2 seasons, contributing to the Stallions' ability to win games. He's not perfect. We've seen problems with Jamar Smith in the past with overthrowing receivers. His arm is almost so strong that I don't think he's used to, if he's throwing a 40-yard pass down the field, it goes for 60 yards. If he has to throw it deep, it is more times than not too deep of a throw for his receivers, just because I don't think he quite has the discipline or he just hasn't toned his game well enough to the point where if you're throwing it deep, the difference between a 50-yard deep ball and a 40-yard deep ball doesn't exist, or at least hasn't existed for Jamar Smith. We'll have to see if that issue has gotten fixed, but that's the number one thing that I worry about with him, especially throwing into, deep coverage where if your opponent's playing some sort of a cover 6 sky or cover 4 where you're throwing into deeper safeties and you're just throwing the ball to the defense, that very well could be a concern for Jamar Smith. It's the UFL, right? None of these quarterbacks are amazing. We're not talking about any Tom Brady's here, but we're talking about still great quarterbacks, very capable quarterbacks, very competent quarterbacks, albeit with their own strengths and weaknesses. Jamar Smith is a perfect example. So you have those 3 quarterbacks, Jamar Smith, Adrian Martinez, Jalen Morton. All 3 of them could at least be employed in a 2-quarterback system. Their 4th quarterback, by the way, Matt Corral. And if you follow football in any capacity, you know who Matt Corral is. He was on Ole Miss as recently as 2021. He brought that team back to a New Year's Six Bowl, got hurt in the bowl game, which I assume is going to be fine at this point in his career, was drafted by the Carolina Panthers. He was very hyped up. He could have been a very, very strong depth piece in the NFL. Now he's in the UFL. He's their 4th-string quarterback, most likely. That just goes to show how great this Birmingham Stallions team is. Matt Corral, we're talking about the UFL, right? The UFL, it's spring football. These are USFL teams and XFL teams. None of these teams are supposed to be great, and Matt Corral, probably the best, well, I shouldn't say that, one of the best quarterbacks in Ole Miss history. A great story in 2021 for that team and for that program. He's the 4th-string quarterback on the best team in the UFL. That goes to show how much talent there is. That goes to show how much really intrigue and storylines we could have once we get to this weekend on Saturday and Sunday when the Stallions take on the Renegades, and we have the other 3 games there that we'll talk about later today. These 4 quarterbacks, all of them are great. All of them are very capable of starting. It's going to be Jamar Smith. I assume with Adrian Martinez one step below him, maybe taking 35% of the snaps like we saw Jamar Smith do for Alex Magoo in the past 2 years of the Birmingham Stallions' time in the USFL, as they've just been dominating everybody and winning championships left and right. On top of that, the Stallions are the best team in the league for a reason. They have one of the better O-lines in the UFL. They have great receivers, and especially with Jamar Smith's arm, this could be a very high-octane offense, a very fun team to watch. We've seen that multiple QB system in the past. Maybe we will see it again. And we just mentioned the fact that they really bolstered their offensive line. Remember, the dispersal draft. There are a lot of great players. There are a lot of very scary players, if you're fans of other teams, that were in the USFL draft pool. The dispersal draft, there were 3 phases of it. I don't need to explain all of it. I'm going to talk about the 3 top draft picks that the Birmingham Stallions picked up. It's not many because the Stallions, their roster was already the best in the league. They're adding to it a little bit first with an offensive tackle named Calvin Ashley, an all USFL tackle from the New Jersey Generals. New Jersey Generals, by the way, I really, really wish they were in this league. I really wish they made the cut. Unfortunately, they didn't. But the New Jersey Generals were one of my favorite teams to watch just because the way they ran the ball, they had a 3 Musketeers running back trio situation. And just Luis Perez was on that team. And I believe DeAndre Smith was on that team. And they ran also a 2-quarterback system. And just watching the Generals, watching them play the game, it was very fascinating, very fun. Their colors were good. Their logo was, in my opinion, incredible. And they didn't make the cut. Maybe they'll come back. The UFL is planning to expand as soon as next year, certainly 2026. We could see some more teams. I hope the New Jersey Generals come back. But either way, the New Jersey Generals offensive line had the most rushing yards last season and the lowest amount of sacks allowed. So Generals running backs rushed for more yards than any other team in the USFL, which partially falls on the offensive line, right? That's some level of success for them, especially when you pair that with the fact that they had the lowest amount of allowed sacks throughout the entire season. For the Generals, Calvin Ashley was a large part of that. He is now on the Birmingham Stallions, alongside Marcus Baugh, a tight end from Michigan. He's going to expand the passing game. The Stallions have one of the better tight end room, probably the best tight end room in the entire league, led by Jace Sternberger. He's been a staple of spring football for a long time. He's an incredible tight end. He's essentially the Travis Kelce or the George Kittle, whoever you want to say. He's the best. He's the face of the league for tight ends in the UFL. There's now a solid foundation of depth behind him with Marcus Baugh. And then the Stallions' 3rd pick in the dispersal draft, they took a kicker. His name is Chris Blewett, which is very ironic, by the way. His last name is Blewett. He's a kicker. I really hope that doesn't come up for them, because if they're in the playoffs and they miss a game-winning kick, the internet's going to go wild with the fact that his name is Chris Blewett. But nonetheless, in the draft, they bolstered their offensive line a little bit, just made that much better, just made the rushing attack that much more scary, just made their pass protection that much more imposing. And they added depth behind Jay Sternberger, which is going to be very important because now the tight end aspect of the offense is far more represented. It's far more it's far more of a threat, right? If you just have Jay Sternberger, it's way easier to game plan around Jay Sternberger and figure out how you're going to use your linebackers to take away that aspect of the offense and that weapon in the offense. But then if you throw in Marcus Baugh on the other side of the field, now you have other problems, right? So their passing game is expanded. Their offensive line is fortified. We'll see how much of an impact those players have on this season when we get to it. And I'm thankful for those players because the Stallions lost a lot of talent. They lost Alex Magoo to the Packers. They lost, as recently as 8-9 days ago, they lost running back Bo Scarborough to retirement. He retired. Alex Magoo is on the Packers. That's their by far best running back and by far, of course, best quarterback. Gone. Not going to play for the Stallions this year. Borderline 0% chance. But they're solid everywhere else, right? The receiver core, incredible. The secondary, incredible. Their linebacker room, incredible. Their D-line, maybe a little bit less incredible, but still great. Still not a concern or a warning sign at all whatsoever. This team, when we look at their strengths, everything comes to mind. Receivers come to mind. At this point, in my opinion, quarterback comes to mind, offensive line. But the real strength that the Birmingham Stallions have, the real way they're going to win games and just suffocate opponents and ensure that they can't score any points all game long, is with pass defense. Their linebacking core is maybe the best in the league. Scooby Wright is a household name at this point in spring football. They also have Chris Orr, an all USFL linebacker. That's a huge aspect of the defense. They're going to take away the crossing routes, right? Those linebackers, they're going to take away the short over the middle passing game as much as they possibly can. The secondary is incredible as well. They drafted Kenny Robinson and Mark Gilbert later in the draft. I didn't mention them before, but I'm mentioning them now. Gilbert was the best defensive back in the entire USFL with the Pittsburgh Maulers, He was an all USFL selection. They already had JoJo Tillery and Lorenzo Burns, two other great aspects of the safeties core. It's an all-around no-fly zone, right? I could keep naming guys. Neville Clark, Daniel Isom. These names mean nothing to you now, but they might mean something to you once we get to Saturday when this team takes on the Arlington Renegades. I don't know exactly who's going to pull away as clear starters. Do Lorenzo Burns and JoJo Tillery retain their positions there? Mark Gilbert, Kenny Robinson, are they stealing some starting jobs? We really don't know yet. We just finished up training camp for the UFL. We're going to find out who is starting, who is playing for this Birmingham Stallions team at 1 p.m. on Saturday. But either way, it doesn't matter who's starting because this Birmingham Stallions secondary is so deep and so talented. Those names probably mean nothing to you. I didn't just say Patrick Peterson, right? I didn't say Richard Sherman. That doesn't mean these players aren't great. It doesn't mean that they're not fully capable of really limiting opposing passing attacks. You pair that with a great linebacking core, and you're looking at a situation where, especially in the UFL, you're playing against quarterbacks. For example, the Michigan Panthers, their starting quarterback is likely going to be E.J. Perry. If it's not, it's Brian Lewerke. Put plainly, the Michigan Panthers don't have the best quarterback situation in the league. Some of those less capable quarterbacks, it's over. They're not going to be able to beat out, especially if they have receivers that are not capable of beating out some of these corners. They're not going to be able to succeed at a high level week in and week out against the Birmingham Stallions. They're going to win games by taking away some of the weaker passing games completely, reducing that threat to zero. And then you're looking at a situation where maybe the Michigan Panthers only scoring 10 points, 9 points against the Stallions when they play them 2 times this year. The secondary is going to have a major role in that. The running back room, if we flip back over to the offense, the running back room, they lost Bo Scarborough. Honestly, I don't think they care. Unbelievable depth, a very stacked running back room. C.J. Marable and Ricky Person Jr. are going to be the most prominent running backs for this team. Marable can really pound the rock. He can really get those hard-fought yards. You're looking at those 2nd and 2s with a loaded box. C.J. Marable's got you. He also can catch. He had the 3rd most receptions on the Birmingham Stallions last year. And remember, this is a Stallions team with Victor Bolden Jr. on it. This is a Stallions team with Jay Sternberger on it. Still, Marable had the 3rd most receptions on the team last year. Larry Roundtree III is a name to know in the backfield as well. Long story short, they have a ton of depth. They're going to fight for the tough yards. This is the type of running back room that you really appreciate in any level of football, because if your quarterback can just get you to 2nd and 3, if your quarterback can get you to 3rd and 2, the drive's over. You're getting the first down, right? It's almost like the tush push for the Philadelphia Eagles. If they get to a 4th and 1, if it's 3rd and 2 and you're running the ball like normal, you're not worried about whether or not you're going to get the first down. If you just get close enough, Jalen Hurts is going to be pushed over that first down marker. He's going to get the first down. You're going to have a new set of downs. It seems to be a similar situation in a different way with the Birmingham Stallions, where this running back room is so talented and frankly just so skillful that if you can make it 2nd and 5, you're probably going to get the first down. And if it's 2nd and goal, you're probably going to score. That's the main strength on the offense, is the running back room, on top of the fact that they have Victor Bolden Jr., on top of the fact that they have Jay Sternberger, and their quarterbacks are very, very competent and capable as well. The defense looks great. The secondary, that pass defense, is going to be very threatening. So the long story short is, can they win a championship in 2024? We're going to ask this question with every single team today in this episode, but can the Birmingham Stallions win a championship? The answer is obviously. Actually, they're probably the most likely to do so across the USFL Conference and the XFL Conference. They're the most complete roster in the league. They have a 21-3 all-time record. I don't need to say much more than that. They're the favorites. Everyone is chasing down the Birmingham Stallions, starting with the Arlington Renegades in the first game of the season, just 4 or 5 days away from now at 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. It's going to feel like an NFL game. You're turning on Fox at 1 p.m. You have the Birmingham Stallions playing. It's going to feel like an NFL game, even though the quality of play is technically not even close. That's all I have on the Birmingham Stallions. They are the favorites to win the UFL championship. If you asked me to bet my life on a team winning the UFL in 2024, my answer would be resoundingly the Birmingham Stallions, if you're going with a chalk pick. If not, maybe you're taking a dark horse. It's the Memphis Showboats, and that's actually the next team I want to talk about today. The Birmingham Stallions, they're the favorites to win the league. They're the favorites to win the USFL Conference. They're going to be in the playoffs. 2 teams in the USFL Conference are going to the playoffs. The Stallions will be at least one of them. The Memphis Showboats, in my opinion, are the biggest dark horse in the UFL next year. They have the best chance of winning the UFL or making the playoffs, making a deep playoff run out of the teams that are not really talked about, right? Not really talked about, in part because the Memphis Showboats haven't existed for all that long. They used to be the Tampa Bay Bandits. The Tampa Bay Bandits were, in 2021, that was the 8th USFL team. And then they became the Memphis Showboats last year, and they were 5-5. They weren't that exciting. They didn't make the playoffs. They were last in the USFL South, I believe it would have been. And now they're back, and in my opinion, they are the dark horse team, the sleeper team to watch in the United Football League. They started last season 0-3. They ended 0-2. So they lost the first 3 games of the season, and they lost the last 2 games of the season. The 5 games in between, they just went on a 5-game winning streak out of nowhere. That still did not quite bring them close enough to the playoffs. I believe the Houston Gamblers were also 5-5, and the New Orleans Breakers got in at 7-3. Behind, of course, the Birmingham Stallions, who were probably 9-1 that season. I would say 8-2, maybe, because they won the championship, and I believe they were 10-2 last year. But either way, a lot of those games, a lot of those losses at the very beginning of the season and the very end of the season were one-score games. Granted, they had a 42-2 loss to the Stallions, which is not encouraging at all. But other than that, all one-score games. They never really fired on all cylinders at the same time. If the offense was clicking, the defense wasn't. If the passing game was clicking, the running back, the running game was getting nowhere. They never really clicked on all cylinders. They never really fired on all cylinders all season long. But I believe they can do it this year. Their quarterback has changed. They're no longer most likely, they're no longer starting Cole Kelly at quarterback. Case Cookus from the Philadelphia Stars is jumping ship over to Memphis, and he is an absolute star. Not just because he played for the Philadelphia Stars last year and the year before that, but because Case Cookus is probably, it's easy to say top 5 because there's only 8 teams in this league. I would make the argument that Case Cookus is potentially a top 3 quarterback in this league. And I understand the fact that we're talking about a UFL with Luis Perez, Jordan Ta'amu, AJ McCarron, etc. in it. Jamar Smith as well, who we just talked about. But Case Cookus is probably the best quarterback in the entire USFL Conference. He could be top 3, maybe top 2 in the entire league. He came from that incredible Philadelphia Stars team. They made the USFL Championship, albeit they lost to the Stallions. But regardless, Case Cookus basically dragged them there. This is a 4-6 team. In the first year of the USFL, it was a very similar story to the Renegades, where you have a 4-6 team that, frankly, did not have much going for it. And Case Cookus, with his arm and his athleticism, he brought that team to a championship in a weak North Division, sure, but he got them there, and he put them in a situation where they very well could have beaten the Birmingham Stallions. That was a close game. Case Cookus was almost a USFL champion. I think we would be having, collectively as a society, we would be having a very different conversation about Case Cookus and the Showboats if he had won that game. He throws the ball at a high level. He can really cut deep into your secondary. And we're looking at Case Cookus. We're looking for him to improve upon that here. And how is he going to do that? Well, the Memphis Showboats just so happen to have amazing receivers. And we're going to talk about that in just a couple minutes. I want to go over the other quarterbacks, and then we'll look at the strengths for the rest of this team. But the Memphis Showboats, it's a match made in heaven. You have maybe the best receiving room in the league. If it's not, it's top 2. Maybe the Battlehawks have better receivers, whatever. It's kind of a pointless argument. But Case Cookus at quarterback, throwing to incredible receivers, throwing to probably the most talented receiving room in the USFL Conference, maybe in the entire UFL. It's a perfect situation. Sure, maybe the offensive line could be a little bit better, but Case Cookus can handle it, right? He's backed up by Cole Kelly. At least, most likely, he's going to be backed up by Cole Kelly. He was the starting quarterback for the Showboats last season, while Cookus was cooking on the Stars. He made the Showboats competitive. Cole Kelly did. They would have won the North. That's important to note. They were 5-5. The best teams in the USFL North Division were 4-6. So 2 teams from the USFL North made the playoffs, 2 teams from the USFL South. The Showboats were last place in the South, but they would have been first place in the North, probably winning that first playoff game at home. And then this could have been a Memphis Showboats team that was in the USFL Championship last year. Not an overly different situation for the Arlington Renegades, right? In the XFL, the Renegades were in the weaker division, and they, I believe it was the South, actually, in the XFL. They were in the XFL South, very weak division. They were 4-6. That was all they needed to do to scrape by and get into the playoffs. And then they just went on a crazy playoff run and beat the 7-3 Houston Roughnecks and the 10-1 DC Defenders, and they won the whole league, right? That could have been the Showboats. Probably not, because the Birmingham Stallions were in the USFL last year, and of course, they're a juggernaut and borderline unbeatable, especially when they're playing 5-5 teams. But the Showboats at 5-5, that would have been enough to win the North Division if they were located somewhere other than Memphis, right? Then they make the playoffs. They're hosting their, the North Division championship game. Very well could have won that game, gone to the USFL Championship, and it could have been a very different situation and a very different narrative surrounding this team and Cole Kelly, going from the worst team in the USFL South to the best team in the USFL North, just based off of, where the team is physically, in which division they're in. If they switched divisions, they would have won that division undoubtedly and would have been a playoff team. Instead, they were not. Cole Kelly was their starting quarterback. He couldn't break through in the South Division, which is acceptable because, like I said, they would have been the best team in the North Division. They would have been hosting a playoff game in the North Division. Cole Kelly is 6'7". He has some very imposing size. He can compete from the starting job. After all, it was his job last season. So the Showboats probably have one of the best top 2 quarterback tandems in the entire league. The Battlehawks, I believe it is, are scary. They have A.J. McCarron and Brandon Silvers, who Brandon Silvers is very capable of starting for any team in this league. Cole Kelly, he's going to compete for the starting job. If not, he's going to be a very strong backup behind Case Cookus. That is at least the notable parts of the Showboats quarterback room. Case Cookus is going to be incredible. He's paired with amazing receivers. When the Memphis Showboats take the field on, I believe, Sunday at 3 against the Houston Roughnecks, just get ready for a fireworks show because the Showboats are going to bring it all to us. You have Cookus, you have Kelly, and then you drafted 2 receivers from the New Orleans Breakers in the first 2 rounds of the USFL dispersal draft. Now, it's important to note that the head coach of the Showboats came from the New Orleans Breakers. So you may not remember, I just mentioned a couple minutes ago how the Memphis Showboats were 5-5. They were last place in the USFL South Division. They couldn't make the playoffs because the New Orleans Breakers were 7-3. They got that second spot instead. They were just the next team to lose to the Stallions. Stallions went on to win the championship. Showboats were left out of the playoffs because the New Orleans Breakers had 2 more wins. That coach, John DeFilippo, is coming from the Breakers, who don't exist anymore, to the Memphis Showboats. That is why their first 3 picks and many more draft picks than that are from the New Orleans Breakers. There's some stat out there. I think there's only 2 or 3 players that they took in the dispersal draft that aren't from New Orleans, which is more than fine because the Breakers were a better team than the Showboats last year. They were a playoff team last year in a division where it's very difficult to, and you actually deserve that playoff spot. They had the second best record in the entire USFL last year. That head coach is coming over. He's bringing a wide receiver named Jonathan Adams with him. He was number 7 in receiving yards. He was number 6 in receptions in the USFL last season. He's a key target. He's a key piece of this offense. There was a play last year for the Breakers. I believe it might have been against the Stars, where their quarterback at that time, Kyle Sloter, just chucks up a moonball for 60 yards to Jonathan Adams. He goes up and grabs it. Highly contested catch, in the back corner of the end zone. Jonathan Adams hauls it in, gets his feet down. That's an NFL level play that Jonathan Adams was making in the USFL the last year or 2 years ago. I will always remember the name Jonathan Adams for that one play. Whenever that was, Kyle Sloter throwing to Jonathan Adams. Huge catch, huge play. And now Case Cookus is throwing to him. And Case Cookus, last time I checked, is a little bit more talented and a little bit more capable and has a little bit better of an arm than Kyle Sloter. He's now throwing to Jonathan Adams. That could be an unbelievable connection if head coach John DeFilippo can get the success that we've seen out of Jonathan Adams in the past back out of him and onto the field. D. Anderson, also a great receiver we see coming over from New Orleans, could have some pretty strong tandem potential with Jonathan Adams. They work very well together. They also grabbed a linebacker, Jordan Brailford. He has huge potential. He was under the radar in a crowded Breakers linebacker room. Linebackers had a lot of great linebackers. Jordan Brailford was one of them. He didn't get a lot of playing time because of it. He could really emerge for the Showboats and at the linebacker position. And so when you look at this team, right? The one strength that I mentioned before, and I'm going to continue to mention, is the quarterback-receiver connection. Case Cookus is vastly entertaining. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the entire UFL. The Showboats do have a stronger offensive line, hopefully healthier receivers. And you look at this receiver room. You look at Sage Surratt. You look at Jonathan Adams. They're going to be key, especially in the red zone. They can go up and get 50-50 balls. I just talked about that with Jonathan Adams. That one play, Kyle Sloter, a 60-yard bomb to Jonathan Adams. I remember they were mic'd up on that drive, and you're hearing the conversation where Jonathan Adams is just telling Sloter, hey, just throw it to me. Like, he's yelling across the field. He's like, just throw it to me. That's all you have to do. Your only job is to throw it to him. And he did. 50-50 ball, probably a little bit less than 50-50. I'm guessing if you pulled up the NFL analytics, Jonathan Adams probably had like a 30% chance of making that catch. He goes up, he makes the play, he gets it, touchdown Breakers, and they won that game late against the Stars. That was a game-winning drive. So Jonathan Adams in the red zone, all over the field, paired with Sage Surratt and D. Anderson, who, by the way, also just happens to be 6'5", and, comes from that 2019 LSU team with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. You remember it. We all do. D. Anderson was on that team as well. He contributed to that team as well. He's paired with Sage Surratt and Jonathan Adams. All you have is three guys that can go up and get 50-50 balls, and their quarterback is going to put them in a very strong position, in a very good position to catch those passes. They're in a great spot. You have a great quarterback. You have great receivers. If your quarterback makes any level of a mistake, your receivers can still compensate for that. Sometimes you look at these great receivers like Jonathan Adams that can go up and get 50-50 balls and win some of those one-on-one battles deep down the field. And you want him to be paired with a weaker quarterback, like maybe E.J. Perry, who we'll talk about in a second, or Reed Sinnett for the Roughnecks. The bottom half of the quarterback pool in the USFL is not great. You want Jonathan Adams to be there because then if your quarterback isn't quite capable enough to fit the ball into super tight windows, Jonathan Adams could go out of his way to get it. They don't need that on the Showboats because Case Cookus is incredible. He's going to cook up some incredible passes and some incredible plays for this team with the help of his receivers. It's a wonderful pairing. It's going to be a fun, high-flying offense. And quite frankly, largely fueled by that fact alone, the Showboats can win a championship in 2024. I think they will be the second postseason team in the USFL Conference. I think the XFL Conference is a little bit more deep. They have three great teams, and then the Brahmas. The USFL has one elite team in the Stallions, then the Showboats. The Roughnecks and the Panthers, we'll just have to wait and see. I could see them being somewhere between 3 and 5 wins, and the Showboats would have 7, and the Stallions would have 9 or 10, in my opinion. This Showboats team, they're going to be in the playoffs. Once they get there, they could make a lot of noise. They're a dark horse to win the UFL and, of course, the USFL Conference. They're going to have to push through the Stallions to get there. But if they can do that in the first round of the if the first round of the UFL playoffs at the USFL Conference Championship, I would not be surprised at all if the Memphis Showboats are lifting trophies this summer once we get to the championship games. It's going to be tough to push past the Stallions, but the Showboats are fully capable of doing it. They should be in the playoffs. It's their playoff bid to lose to either the Roughnecks or the Panthers. We'll see what happens from there. But the Showboats will be in the playoffs, in my opinion, and I believe they'll have a real strong chance at taking down the Birmingham Stallions, regardless of how most of the rest of the season goes. The Showboats can win a championship. They're a dark horse to do so. If you're looking for a value pick, if you're going to bet on a team, it's probably the Showboats. I'm not recommending that. I've never bet on sports in my life, mainly because it's illegal, where I am at least. But, the Showboats, there's a lot of value there. If you pick the Stallions, you're not having the largest payout because they're the most likely team to do so. But if you're looking for a dark horse team, if you're looking for a sleeper team, the Memphis Showboats are what you're looking for. All right, we're halfway through these USFL teams. We're gone for 40 minutes. I expect this to be a very long episode. I didn't say that at the beginning, but we have a lot of these USFL teams, this whole USFL conference to go over. Then there was some NFL free agency news and some moves that I want to talk about. Then this episode will end, and we'll get to watch these games this weekend and then talking about them next week. I'm going to take a sip of water real quick, and then let's talk about the Houston Roughnecks. Okay, I'll have to cut that out later. I realize now I should probably go back and just find the dead air in the middle where I'm taking 30 seconds to drink a sip of water. That's going to be something I'll do when I turn off the camera here. But the Memphis Showboats, we just talked about them. We talked about the Birmingham Stallions. Those are undoubtedly the two best teams in the USFL Conference. There's still two other teams in there, right? The Houston Roughnecks. Now, by the way, if you followed the XFL and the USFL last season, you're probably wondering why the Roughnecks are in the USFL Conference. Yes, the Houston Roughnecks were the XFL team last year. The USFL had a team called the Houston Gamblers. So that Houston team, obviously they're only having one team in Houston. This is the Houston Gamblers from last season. All the same players, or at least, largely, the same players, the same coaches, the same facilities, the same whatever. This is the Houston Gamblers. They're taking the name of the Houston Roughnecks probably because the Roughnecks are just way more popular and they're way more fun and interesting. They had way more viewership last season. They had in 2020 PJ Walker, who's now a surefire NFL, second string quarterback. He was on the Colts. He was on my Indianapolis Colts as a fourth stringer. I very vividly remember him in a preseason game. And then he ended up on the Roughnecks because he didn't work out in the NFL. The Colts were wrong about him. He goes to the XFL. He balls out. You could very clearly tell that was an NFL quarterback that was in the XFL. The Roughnecks were the best team in the league before COVID came around and the league had to fold. And now he's on the Browns, and he started actually against my Colts last season in the fall. So that Roughnecks entire storyline with PJ Walker just lighting up the world, that was why the Roughnecks were so popular. The Houston Gamblers have not had a situation like that, so I think that they're just trying to put the most popular and the most recognizable branding on this USFL Conference team. So it's the Houston Gamblers, but it's the Houston Roughnecks. Last season, the Roughnecks were 7-3, but that's not the team we're talking about. We're really talking about the 2023 Houston Gamblers. They were 5-5. They had a similar season trajectory to the Showboats. Granted, they were in a very tough division. The Showboats were a great team. The Stallions were the best team resoundingly in the league. The Breakers were a playoff team and the second best record. They deserve to be there. Very difficult division, right? The Roughnecks still managed to get to 5-5. They did pick up a division win against the Stallions outright. They just flat out beat the Stallions in the middle of the year. That was incredible. That was fun to see. And last year, the Gamblers, their scheme, their game plan, their strategy was essentially just to run the ball with Mark Thompson and play good defense. Mark Thompson is coming back for the Houston Roughnecks, I suppose, now. They ran the ball with Mark Thompson, and they played good defense, and that was essentially all they did. And that's probably going to have to be their game plan and their approach to the game again this season, because at quarterback, their starting quarterback is Reed Sinnott. He played one game for the Brahmas, so he wasn't. The Brahmas, by the way, were terrible last year. That was my favorite team. I probably should wear my Brahmas sweatshirt on the show at some point. But he was not good, right? Third string, fourth string quarterback. He played one game for the Brahmas. Granted, he did look very promising until he broke his foot, and then he's out for the season, and that was all we saw of Reed Sinnett. He was not the starting quarterback. Jack Cohn was, and he came in eventually in the middle of the year. Kurt Benkert came in as well. The Brahmas really never had a quarterback. Reed Sinnott, he was not able, in part because of the injury, but just in general, he was not able to break through that ceiling and be the surefire San Antonio Brahmas starting quarterback who ended the year 3-7 with no hope of winning a championship. They were one game away from the playoffs because the Renegades were only 4-6. The Brahmas were never going to win a playoff game. They were never going to do what the Arlington Renegades did, in part because they just didn't have a quarterback. And Reed Sinnott, the way the Gamblers, or I suppose the Roughnecks, I'm going to make that mistake a million times because this is the Gamblers, but they're just wearing Houston Roughnecks uniforms. But either way, Reed Sinnott, because of the way this Houston team plays, he's not going to need to be much. He just needs to be a Brandon Silvers level quarterback. He needs to get the ball where it needs to go only when they need him to, right? Because Mark Thompson is going to probably pick up the majority of the yards on offense. Sinnott is expected to be the Houston Roughnecks starter. Brandon Silvers, who I just compared him to, is expected to be the Battlehawks' second-string quarterback. Do you see where the problem lies there? Where you have a quarterback who would be an incredible backup. If Reed Sinnott was the backup Roughnecks quarterback, I would feel amazing about where that depth was in this quarterback room and what position that was in. But he's their starter. And if he can come into this role and if he can find success, which shouldn't be hard to do because the Roughnecks are supposed to have an incredible defense and they're supposed to have one of the better running back situations in the entire league with Mark Thompson. Now, they don't have the best defense and they don't have the best running backs, and that's why this Roughnecks team, in my opinion, is not going to succeed at a very high level because their strengths, the thing that they're going to rely on completely, because I believe that they're going to rely heavily, probably too heavily, on their running game and their defense. But those two, if you have 4 legs on a chair, those are the 2 strongest ones. But if you're only relying on those 2 legs, unless those legs are like a whole pillar wide, as I hit my mic, excuse me, unless those are like, 3 feet wide, your chair's not staying up, right? If it's 3 feet wide, then maybe they are. If this was the Birmingham Stallions defense, and okay, that's not a fair assessment. I was going to say the Birmingham Stallions defense. I was thinking of the best running backs, and the first thing that came to mind was the Birmingham Stallions running backs. So if you take the Birmingham Stallions defense and running backs and you put it on this Roughnecks team, maybe they have a much better chance of going to the playoffs and making some noise once they get there. But they have maybe the 4th best defense. They have maybe the 3rd best running back room. And if those are your 2, best strengths, if those are the 2 fortes, strong points of your team, you're not going to succeed at a high level because you're looking at that chair where the legs on the chair are just normal sized, right? They're maybe 3 inches wide. But if they were 3 feet wide, then you're having a different conversation. That chair can stay up on 2 legs all day long, but that's just not the case for the Houston Roughnecks. And in my opinion, that is why they are going to fail and have no chance of going to the playoffs, certainly no chance of necessarily winning a championship. Jarrett Garantano, if Reed Sinnott doesn't work out, which is very possible, if he doesn't pan out, Jarrett Garantano is likely your guy that you're looking at quarterback for the Roughnecks. He had an up-and-down college career. His arm and overall size is very promising. He's still a mystery. But for this Roughnecks team, if it's not Reed Sinnott, it's probably Jarrett Garantano. And then you have Nolan Henderson out of Delaware, who potentially could make some noise. We don't really know how training camp has been going. We don't really know where these quarterback battles have been what the results of those quarterback battles have been. But it's likely going to be Reed Sinnott with Jarrett Garantano behind him and Nolan Henderson sort of stowed away in the back corner of the quarterback room. This team's a mystery overall, all right? The Roughnecks, I don't have very much faith in them at all whatsoever because those 2 strong points, the running game and the defense, aren't really strong points in the grand scheme of the entire league. This whole quarterback situation, who knows, right? Is Reed Sinnott going to be amazing? Maybe. He also could be terrible. And then we're in a real tough situation where you're asking Jarrett Garantano, of all people on planet Earth, to bring the Roughnecks back and bring them back into the mix of the USFL playoff conversation. Thankfully, they know what they are, right? The Roughnecks know exactly what they are. They know exactly what they're going to be. They're going to be a team that plays defense and runs the ball. And they leaned into that very effectively in the dispersal draft. They took in the first 3 picks, they took 2 offensive tackles and a tight end. Actually, in the first 4 picks, they took 2 offensive tackles and 2 tight ends, right? So in their first 4 picks, all players that can block, that can help this running game really make some noise, and those tight ends even could complement pretty well into this run game. Now that I'm looking back on how the Roughnecks played the game last year, you're looking at those 5-yard out routes of some of these tight ends, those big targets. That could work out, and that could fit with this team and this scheme very well as well. Paul Adams is coming over from the Breakers. I talked about how the Breakers had one of the better offensive lines in the entire USFL. Paul Adams, he's going to help this run game. He was a bright spot on that solid Breakers offensive line. The Generals had the best offensive line. They had, remember, the most rushing yards out of any team in the USFL, and the New Jersey Generals did not have the best running backs, but still, the most rushing yards were gained by the Generals on the ground. Isaiah Battle comes from that offensive line over to the Roughnecks offensive line. Now you have 2 more offensive tackles to at the very least add depth to an offensive line in a world where, that position is very vulnerable injury-wise throughout the course of a season, especially at the spring football level. You add some depth to that offensive line. You bring in a couple tight ends named Braden Bowman and Woody Brandom. Both of them are coming from the Generals. Both are great tight ends. Both are great red zone targets if you need to throw the ball, inside the 20-yard line or really any place all over the field. Now you have 2 more offensive tackles. You have 2 more tight ends to bolster, sort of your short passing game with the tight ends and also your offensive line and therefore the running game and the pass protection. They're in a great spot. The Roughnecks, as far as the run game goes, their position in that way is a whole lot better. The defense maybe not, but at the very least, they're going to run the ball effectively throughout the season. That's going to be how they beat some of these lower level teams. It's going to be how they probably stumble to a 4-6, 5-5 record, maybe 6-4 for all we know. Their strengths, as I've been saying this entire time, are defense in the trenches. They have great blockers, they have powerful running backs, and a defense that can at least, be a pretty considerable leg to stand on in those chairs that I'm talking about. But they don't have the best defense in the league by any means, right? It's not going to be unbelievable. It's not going to be lights out. They're not going to be shutting out teams. Their secondary had some problems last year, and that really, really concerns me when you start to talk about the fact that the Showboats, who they're playing this weekend, have Case Cookus and 3 incredible receivers. Jonathan Adams is on that team now. Defense in the trenches for the Houston Roughnecks. So that's the name of the game for them. We'll see how that pans out. I don't think it's going to succeed. Can they win a championship in 2024? I doubt it. I don't think that in this age of professional football, and I understand the fact that we're talking about the UFL, not the NFL, but nonetheless, at this stage of professional football, there's too many holes at quarterback and receiver, which are fundamentally 2 of the most important positions in the entire league and the entire game in 2024. There's too many holes there for, I think, me to honestly say that the Houston Roughnecks can find high levels of success or the highest level of success in winning this league just by playing good enough defense and have a very strong run game. I don't think they're going to be able to do it. They could totally contend for that second USFL playoff spot. They could 100% beat out the Showboats. They could 100% beat out the Panthers. But not much more than that, right? Are the Roughnecks going to beat the Stallions? I doubt it. Granted, they did last year, but I don't think in the playoffs they're going to be able to beat the Stallions. And then after that, are they beating the best team from the XFL the next week? Probably not. Granted, I would have said the same thing about the Arlington Renegades last year, and they won the XFL out of nowhere as a 4-6 team, right? I don't think the Roughnecks are capable of doing that because at the very least, the Renegades had a quarterback in Luis Perez, and they had a decent enough talent pool around them. The Roughnecks just don't have that in the passing game, and unfortunately, that's why I believe that the Roughnecks cannot win a championship in 2024 and will probably lose to the Showboats this Sunday in the last game of the weekend. All right, we have one more USFL team to talk about. That would be, we've talked about 7 of the 8 teams. Last week we talked about the XFL Conference. This week we talked about the USFL Conference, or we are talking about the USFL Conference. We're through 7 of the 8 teams. We have one more, and that's the Michigan Panthers. And then after that, we're going to delve into the NFL free agency. We're going to talk about some quarterbacks. We're going to talk about some NFL teams. Really switch gears from spring football, which is playing in 5 days, and the NFL, which is playing in closer to 5 months. The Michigan Panthers. Last season was not a good year at all whatsoever for the Michigan Panthers. They were in a bad division, though. The USFL North was not impressive at all, and they sort of fell backwards into the playoffs because of a Week 10 win over the Philadelphia Stars. The Panthers just happened to make the playoffs. I believe it was the 4-6 Panthers, the 4-6 Maulers, either 4-6 or 3-7 Philadelphia Stars. And then I'm blanking on the 4th USFL North team. I just know they don't exist anymore. And they were not good, right? They probably 1 or 2 wins. They were never going to make the playoffs. So they were in a bad division. They accidentally make the playoffs with that Week 10 win over Philadelphia. And then they lost a close one to the Pittsburgh Maulers, which doesn't really matter because they would have gotten mauled by Birmingham a week later the same way that the Pittsburgh Maulers did anyway. So the Panthers were likely not going to win a USFL championship last year, but they got there with E.J. Perry. Kind of. Not really. Brian Lewerke started most of the year. E.J. Perry started the last 2 games of the year. He got him to the playoffs, technically. Beat the Philadelphia Stars. Got into the playoffs, had a real chance to take down the Maulers. He shined while there in those 2 games. He's still dangerous when he's outside the pocket, especially if he's paired with spectacular receivers. The Panthers are not a team with spectacular receivers. E.J. Perry, he's a pocket quarterback, but he can excel outside the pocket. I just don't think he's going to because he doesn't have a strong enough team around him. And you look at this E.J. Perry situation, you look at this quarterback situation with the Panthers, and you say, okay, this guy that started 2 games for us last year, is he going to be our starter? Is he going to lead us to a championship? They're going to have to say yes, and I don't think that's going to work out very well for them. If E.J. Perry doesn't pan out, then you turn to Brian Lewerke. If he doesn't work out, you're pairing or you're turning to Danny Etling, right? These are players that just don't really jump off the page to me. It's a lot of Brock Purdy's on this quarterback room. E.J. Perry, Brian Lewerke, Davis Cheek, Danny Etling. It's a lot of Brock Purdy's. Brock Purdy can have success in the NFL. He can have success on the San Francisco 49ers because he has Deebo Samuel on his team and Christian McCaffrey and Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle, Trent Williams, that incredible offensive line. That's how Brock Purdy can find a ton of success in the NFL. But the Panthers just don't have the supporting cast, to bring E.J. Perry closer to success. They were 4-6 last year for a reason. Regardless of who was at quarterback, it doesn't really matter. They were 4-6 last season. They don't have the supporting cast around E.J. Perry. They know that, and they knew that ahead of the USFL dispersal draft. Then they tried to fix that a little bit. With that draft, their first 3 draft picks, they took Adonis Alexander, a safety from New Orleans. Obviously, that doesn't help E.J. Perry very much, but it bolsters the defense. He was tied for 8th in pass deflections. He's going to add to the depth of this team very effectively. They helped the offensive line out a little bit. Brought in Jacob Burton from the Philadelphia Stars. That might be a questionable pick. The Stars' offensive line was questionable last year, and Jacob Burton was not the brightest spot on that line. You bring him in. Is he going to pan out? I don't know. Maybe the Panthers see something in him. I personally don't. Then they took a quarterback, Davis Cheek from New Orleans, another depth piece who's not better than Danny Etling or E.J. Perry or Brian Lewerke, right? So Davis Cheek probably isn't going to see the field at all this season. So you look at this dispersal draft and you say, okay, they took a safety who is going to be great. You took an offensive lineman that probably isn't going to play, and you took a quarterback that probably isn't going to play, and those are your first 3 picks in the dispersal draft. That's not very encouraging at all. Is E.J. Perry going to be great? Maybe. It's very possible that E.J. Perry is one of the better quarterbacks in this league. I just don't think that's the case. I think he's at most maybe the 6th best quarterback in the league. And there's really not many strengths when you look at this Michigan Panthers team, right? If you had to pick one, you would probably go with the secondary. There is a lot of depth there. We just talked about the fact that they picked up Adonis Alexander in the dispersal draft from the Breakers. He could cause significant problems for the lower level passing attacks. But when you look around at this secondary, right? I just said that they can cause significant problems for lower level passing attacks. But when you look at quarterbacks like Case Cookus, A.J. McCarron, Jamar Smith, Luis Perez, they're going to have no problems with this Michigan Panthers team. And so you're looking at a defense that's going to struggle to slow down some of these hyper-talented USFL Conference and XFL Conference teams. And you look at an offense led by E.J. Perry with not very strong receivers, not the best offensive line, nothing special in the running back room. It's just not looking good for the Michigan Panthers. The Detroit Lions, they reached a new level of success, one that they haven't seen ever in the NFL last year on Ford Field. The Michigan Panthers are now going to take over on Ford Field, and I expect them to have a very low level of success. Probably they're going to be the worst team in the USFL Conference. I don't think they can win I don't think they can win a UFL championship in 2024 at all. The whole roster is sort of bland. Nothing flashes in the pan. Nothing strikes me as a, opportunity for them to maybe win some games. E.J. Perry. Wow, the Michigan Panthers, they're really going to make a run for the UFL championship. I don't think that's going to be something that we can say a few weeks from now as we look up where they're probably 0-2, 0-3, 0-4, something along those lines. Their quarterback, E.J. Perry, who they were really banking on coming back, the Michigan Panthers, when he came back, he announced he was returning. They were overjoyed. Michigan Panthers fans were. He's played 2 games in the USFL. He's played in spring football, he's played 2 games as a starter. That is not encouraging at all whatsoever. They were a losing record team last year for a reason, despite the fact that they made the playoffs. I'm not excited about them at all. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see if they can prove me wrong. But I have very little faith in the Michigan Panthers next season. All right. That was all of the USFL Conference teams, we talked about their strengths, we talked about their weaknesses, we talked about their quarterbacks, we talked about who they have bringing or who they added to their team in the draft, who they have coming back from last year. And now we're looking at a situation. The USFL Conference is done. The XFL Conference is done. We've talked about all these teams. We've talked about all of these players and rosters. And now all we have left to do is watch some football games, because on Saturday we have 2 games. We have the Birmingham Stallions traveling to Arlington to play the Renegades, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox, and then right after it at 4 p.m. Eastern on Fox, you're going to see the St. Louis Battlehawks travel to Ford Field to take on the Michigan Panthers, who I just talked about. Then the next day, the DC Defenders return to the Alamo Dome at noon on ESPN. That's the Brahmas and the DC Defenders. And then at 3 p.m., you have the Roughnecks and the Showboats. That is the slate of Week 1 games in the UFL. It's not incredible. There are better games going to happen this season. I want to preview this week, though, have some predictions, have some storylines headed into it, because I think this could be a very, very fascinating first week of this season, where we're going to really see. Maybe everything I just said about all those USFL Conference teams, maybe everything I said was wrong. There's only one way to find out, and it starts with the Stallions at the Arlington Renegades. I want to talk about this game. I want to preview this game and the other 3 games before we talk about the NFL, just because independent of how the teams are going to do over the course of this entire season, I want to talk about the specific games that they're playing this weekend, because I find those, at least some of those, very fascinating. The most fascinating of them is the first game. The Stallions are traveling to Arlington. They're going to take on the Renegades, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. I've said that about 50 times this episode, on Saturday, March 30th. And so the Renegades, if you didn't listen to last week's episode, which is totally fine, I talked about the Renegades, and I talked about this air raid style offense, where if you don't know what that means, you have Luis Perez, who is not the most talented quarterback ever, not the best quarterback ever by any means, still one of the better, long-time spring football quarterbacks. If you watch spring football at any capacity, you know who Luis Perez is, because he's been in essentially every single league, bounced around from various teams depending on what league exists and which teams exist. Finally, we have a UFL that, in my opinion, is going to last for a very long time and become the premier spring football league, and Luis Perez will likely be there with it. But you have him, right? And the air raid offense, it has to do with a lot of short, quick-fired passes. You're looking at 5-yard out routes. You're looking at 7-yard crossers, right? Luis Perez, when he drops back in the pocket, he doesn't really go through a progression, right? Usually at the quarterback position, your quarterbacks are going to be, they have their number 1 guy. They know who they're looking at first. If he's not open, then you have your number 2 option, and then 3, and you're going through your progression until you find who you want to throw the ball to. Luis Perez doesn't really do that all that often, because he seems to know there seems to be a predestined or predetermined destination for where the ball is going to go when the play starts. Is he throwing to Sal Cannella? Is he throwing to Tyler Vaughns in the flat? Is he throwing to LaJuan Whittingham 12 yards down the field? He knows exactly where he's going with the ball, and usually he moves through that progression so quickly and gets the ball out of his hand so quickly that the defense doesn't have enough time to react, and his guys are wide open, albeit maybe wide open 5 yards down the field, but wide open nonetheless. And if you get 5 yards on every single play, you're going to score, because all you need is 10 yards for a first down, and you have 4 plays to do that. So this air raid offense worked very, very well for the Renegades against the DC Defenders in the XFL Championship last season. The main question that we need to ask, is whether or not we're going to see the 4-6 Arlington Renegades this weekend, or if we're going to see the defending XFL champion Arlington Renegades last season. And they have the toughest test possible to prove it against the Birmingham Stallions in Week 1. The Renegades have a very difficult start to the year. They're going to employ that air raid style offense. They're going to play the best defense that they possibly can, although they did lose TJ Barnes, who was the best defensive tackle in the XFL last year. He is now on the DC Defenders, actually, their XFL rivals. So the defense loses some talent. It's not going to be incredible. It's a very middle-of-the-pack, lower-level defense in the UFL. But Luis Perez and that air raid style offense, that's going to be their main hallmark of success. Are they able to parlay that into tangible success and wins? I honestly think the answer is probably not. They have a very, very difficult start to the year. They start at home against the Birmingham Stallions, defending USFL champions, 21-3 over the last 2 seasons, undoubtedly the best team in the league, the favorites to win the championship. Then the next week, they just casually travel to St. Louis to play the Battlehawks. They're going to walk into the place where the UFL championship will be held this year, against actually the loudest crowd, the most passionate fans in the UFL, are fans of the St. Louis Battlehawks. They go there in week 2, and then when they come back home, they're playing against the DC Defenders, who they played in the XFL Championship last year. So they have the USFL champions, the team they played in the XFL Championship last year, and the loudest fan base in the entire UFL the first 3 weeks in the season. It's very possible that the Renegades start 0-3. 2 of those games are pivotal conference games. They only get to go down to St. Louis once. They only get a chance to pick up a major win against the Battlehawks in division once. The DC Defenders, they only get to host the DC Defenders once, right? They're going to DC and to Audi Field when they play them later in the year. You want to pick up that tie-breaking win right now. It's their one shot against the best team in the league as well, in the Birmingham Stallions. It's 3 teams. They have very valid reason to want to beat all of them, more so than maybe some other teams around the league. Like I said, the Battlehawks, that could be a major tie-breaking win or loss when you look at, when we get to the end of this thing and there's a bottleneck at the top of the XFL Conference, the Renegades are going to very much appreciate a tie-breaking win over the Battlehawks. They're going to very much appreciate a home tie-breaking win over the DC Defenders. And you only play the Stallions once, right? You want to make that right before we get to the playoffs and before we get to a championship situation where maybe you have to play the Stallions again. The Renegades have a tough schedule. They have a very tough first game against the Stallions. They're going to try to employ that air raid style offense. We'll see if they can find any success with it. The Stallions, on the other hand, are going to try to learn what life is like without Alex Magoo and Bo Scarborough, right? Is Jamar Smith good enough? I think so. Is Adrian Martinez good enough? I think so as well. Watch out for that 2-quarterback system. I think that's going to play a major role in the development and the progression of this first game against the Renegades. The Stallions have the best roster in the league, and all that's left to do really is execute with that best roster. My prediction is that the Renegades don't have a stellar receiving core. It's certainly not bad, but it's not overly noteworthy. LaDron Whittingham is great. Tyler Vaughn, Sal Cannella. I realize now I'm naming receivers I think are great, but it's not the best receiving core. Luis Perez is not the most talented quarterback. And when you have that combination going up against the combination of the Birmingham Stallions, who I just said earlier in this episode have the best secondary and maybe the best linebackers in the entire league, there's a pretty good chance that that pass defense is going to be too much for Luis Perez or whoever starts the quarterback for the Renegades to handle. On the other side, the Stallions offense is very high-flying, very high-octane. Maybe you have a 2-quarterback system. Maybe you have the legs fresh on both Jamar Smith and Adrian Martinez. You also have amazing receivers. You're looking at Jay Sternberger. You're looking at Victor Bolden Jr. There's a vast array of options. And the running game, by the way, CJ Marable. I just said earlier this episode, if it's 2nd and 3, you're good. If it's 3rd and 3, don't worry about it. CJ Marable is picking up that first down. You pair that aspect of the offense with great receivers like Victor Bolden Jr. and like Jay Sternberger. Jamar Smith's a very capable quarterback. There's a lot of options. There's a lot of different ways that the Birmingham Stallions can just break down your defense and attack Arlington effectively. And against an Arlington Renegades defense that I just said wasn't that impressive to me, I think the Stallions are going to win this game. They've consistently dominated spring football for 2 years. Arlington flashed in the pan for 2 games, right? The Renegades had 2 games of greatness. They were 4-6. They went to the playoffs. They barely beat the Roughnecks, who were 7-3, and then they actually dominated the Defenders, but nonetheless, right? They had 2 great games against the Houston Roughnecks and the DC Defenders. They beat 2 amazing teams in 2 games, 1 time last season in those playoffs. The Stallions are 21-3 in their first 2 seasons in the USFL. There is a difference, right? The Renegades are technically defending XFL champions, but in my opinion, they're not the best team in the XFL. They might not be the top 2 teams in the XFL conference. They may not be a playoff team, and they're taking on the Birmingham Stallions in week 1. It's a very interesting situation, but I'm a huge fan of this game because the way they scheduled it, obviously there's a lot of intrigue with the USFL champion against the XFL champion. But as long as this game is reasonably close, it's still fun and interesting. Because if the Birmingham Stallions, let's just say they win by 40. If the Stallions beat the Renegades by 40, you still don't have the narrative necessarily that the USFL Conference is just that much more talented and that much better than the XFL Conference, right? Because the Renegades they could totally just be the 3rd best team in the XFL. The Battlehawks and the Defenders, if the Stallions beat the Renegades by 40, the conversation is not going to be that the USFL is just so much better than the XFL and it's going to be very clearly lopsided this entire season. The conversation is going to be, wow, the Renegades were frauds. Whether that's fair or not, that's going to be the narrative, that the Renegades were frauds. I can't wait for the Stallions to play the real teams in the XFL Conference. I can't wait for them to play the DC Defenders or the St. Louis Battlehawks, right? What's that going to look like when they take on those teams? That's going to be the narrative as we move forward into next season, or excuse me, next week and, the rest of this season with the Birmingham Stallions. Now, on the flip side of that, if the Renegades win, now we're having a way different conversation because, first of all, the Renegades very well could be contenders to run it back and win another championship. Or maybe the XFL Conference is just better than the USFL Conference. Maybe the Birmingham Stallions haven't played against real competition yet because the USFL, largely the USFL, could just be a joke. I don't think that's the case. I think this game is going to be close. I think the Birmingham Stallions, if I were to set a line on it, and I actually don't know what the Vegas odds for these games are, if there are any. I looked it up. I couldn't find odds for these games. But the Stallions, I would say they're favored by about 8.5. I could see this game in the first game of the UFL season. I could see it being a situation where the Stallions really push the idea of, I could see them dominating most of the game, being up by 9, right? Being up by 10 maybe. Remember, in the UFL, you can score 9 points on a possession. There's no extra points. You can go for 1 from the 2-yard line. You can go for 2 from the 5-yard line. You can go for 3 from the 10-yard line. And, I could see this being a situation. If you watch a lot of football, you know this scenario where, let's just say, the Dallas Cowboys are winning against the New York Giants 27-18, right? It's a 9-point lead, and the Giants have the ball with 4 minutes left. The losing team has the ball with 4 minutes left, and the game just feels like it's over because even if you score, even if you get the 2-point conversion, you're still another possession away. You're still 2 possessions away, just barely. And I think that could totally be the end of this game. With the Renegades, Luis Perez gets the ball back with 3:37 to go in the fourth quarter, and they're down by 10, or they're down by 9, and they just don't get the 3-point conversion, which is very possible. The Stallions have consistently dominated spring football for 2 years. It's a new season. It's a new league. It's a new world. They've never played a team like the Renegades before because the Renegades were an XFL Conference team for the longest time. The Stallions are familiar with Luis Perez. He was on the New Jersey Generals 2 years ago before jumping ship to the XFL and the Renegades. The Stallions, I think, are going to win this game. I think they'll win it by a little bit more than 1 possession. If I were to set a line on it, I would say 8.5. That's about where I think we are for the Stallions. I think they're going to win. I think they're going to have no problems. But the Renegades could keep it close. They could hang around in there. And if the Renegades win this game, we're having a very different conversation next week back on the Early Bird podcast after the first 4 games of the UFL season. The second one, and I can feel the sun rising behind me. It's early in the morning. I was hoping I could time up this episode and time up recording of this episode to where when I finish, I can upload it with the sun rising behind me. But it just feels brighter in this room. I don't know if that's like my circadian rhythm clock letting me know that like it's daytime now, but it felt like nighttime when I started recording this. And suddenly it feels like the sun is up and it's during the day. I'm not going to check, but maybe you can see light behind me through these curtains. But I feel like the sun is rising. Maybe I'm completely wrong. I could look like a complete idiot. If you're watching on YouTube, maybe you're seeing just pitch black behind me and you're seeing nothing, and I'm just completely wrong. But it feels like it's daytime now, which makes me very happy and it makes me very excited. And maybe I'm going to be more upbeat the rest of this episode because of it, because it doesn't feel like the middle of the night anymore. But nonetheless, regardless, the St. Louis Battlehawks are taking on the Michigan Panthers at 4 p.m. Eastern on Fox on Saturday, March 30th. The St. Louis Battlehawks are bringing back A.J. McCarron, which is not something that we could have said for sure just a few days or a few weeks ago. The emergence of this passing game is going to be incredible to watch. The Battlehawks, A.J. McCarron, maybe he's the best quarterback in the entire league. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the XFL Conference, probably top 2 with Jordan Ta'amu. You have Case Cookus on the other side. You have Jamar Smith on the other side, on the USFL side of things. But nonetheless, A.J. McCarron, he's going to be one of, if not the best quarterback in the UFL this year. They also have incredible receivers. They might light up the Dome at America's Center this season, and they might light up Ford Field this weekend because the Michigan defense just isn't strong enough to stop them. For the Battlehawks, the one narrative is just to take care of business. The Panthers shouldn't have anything to say about this game. We know about how great the Battlehawks receiving core is. We know about how great A.J. McCarron is. That should be all she wrote, right? We also know how great the offensive line is. Probably the best in the league. That should just be the only conversation we're having. That should be the only thing you're thinking about, is the fact that the Battlehawks have a great quarterback, great receivers, and an even better offensive line, and the Panthers shouldn't have the defense to compete with that. On the offensive side for the Panthers, the real question is just whether or not EJ Perry is really that good. What are the strong points of this team? I have no idea. Do they have a real shot to succeed in the USFL Conference? I have no idea, because we haven't seen this team play in the current iteration that it is. We haven't seen EJ Perry in a regular season game, in a season opener ever in the UFL, right? We're going to find out on Ford Field a lot about this Michigan Panthers team. I think this game is going to tell us more about Michigan than it will about St. Louis. We know who St. Louis is. We know they're great. We know they're fully capable of making the playoffs. We know they're fully capable of winning a UFL championship, or at least an XFL Conference championship. The Panthers, we don't have any answers on. We don't know who they are. We don't know what their identity is. We don't know what their strengths are. We don't know what their approach to the game is. We don't know how they're going to win games, if they're going to win any games this season. We know nothing. This is going to be a very fascinating home game against a beatable, a winnable game against the St. Louis Battlehawks is what we're going to see this weekend on Saturday. It's a mystery team, the Michigan Panthers are, and we're going to learn a lot, especially if they pull off the upset. My prediction is that the Battlehawks are going to win by about 2 scores. 13.5 is the line that I have here. I don't think it will be close, but the Battlehawks aren't world beaters, right? The Battlehawks, it's not like they're just a Darth Vader unbeatable stormtrooper army that's just marching into Ford Field to take out the Panthers. The Panthers, this is a winnable game. I would be very, very impressed if the Michigan Panthers pulled out a win here and started the season 1-0. I don't think they're going to do it. I think the Battlehawks, are going to win by 2 scores. But if the Panthers can pull this off, and if they can prove to the world, and prove to me, and prove to you, and prove to us, that they have an identity, they have an approach to the game, they have an approach to winning, they have a method to their madness. If that's true, if we can say all of those things truthfully about the Michigan Panthers in about 6 days, I would be very, very, very impressed. We'll have to see if that ends up being the case. We'll have to see if the Michigan Panthers can do anything against the Battlehawks. I don't think they'll do much. I think the Battlehawks will win by 2 scores, but that's only time will tell, right? EJ Perry, I'm waiting for him to prove me wrong. This Michigan Panthers roster, I'm waiting for them to prove me wrong. They can do so on Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern on Fox at home against the St. Louis Battlehawks. And then that's it for Saturday, right? That's the only games that we have going on Saturday. After that, we wait until Sunday, where the DC Defenders take on the San Antonio Brahmas at 12 p.m. Eastern on ESPN on Sunday, March 31st. The Defenders are probably the best team in the XFL. Maybe not. The Arlington Renegades, of course, won the championship last year. The Battlehawks are still very strong. They're at least top 3 in a 4-team conference, which essentially tells us nothing. But the San Antonio Brahmas, this is a division game, right? We haven't seen a division game yet. The Stallions and Renegades, that's across divisions. The Battlehawks and the Panthers, that's across divisions. We have 2 division games on Sunday. The Defenders are traveling back to the Alamo Dome to take on the Brahmas. Remember, the Defenders barely eliminated the Brahmas from playoff contention last season in, I believe, week 9, or maybe it was week 10 of the season there, where the Defenders, it was like 29-28. The Brahmas finally had a chance to beat a good team. That was the first bad sign that we started to see of the Defenders when we said, hey, maybe this team isn't going to win at all. I know they're 10-1 or 9-1 at that time. Maybe they're not going to win at all. And then they didn't win at all. They lost to the Renegades, who got into the playoffs because the Defenders beat the Brahmas and kept them out. But for the Defenders, right? This defensive line is going to win the battle in the trenches. I have no question about that. It's not going to be close. The Brahmas do not have the surefire strength at offensive line. The Brahmas' offensive line was terrible last season. They couldn't do anything on offense because all of their problems stemmed from the fact that all 5 of their offensive line, it felt like, were getting beat on every single play. We might see that happen again. Sure, they made it better. Sure, they picked up some pieces in the draft. The Brahmas did. We talked about that last week. But the Defenders' defensive line, with Davin Bellamy and TJ Barnes, it's not going to be close. They are winning the battle in the trenches. So the question for the Defenders on offense is whether or not the deep passing game opens up in week 1, right? The Jordan Ta'amu, he's paired with great receivers. Jordan Ta'amu, he has an arm. He has the accuracy to throw it deep, and he's done that all of last season. And he was one of the only quarterbacks that could do that in the XFL last year at a high level. And that's why they won so many games and had a real chance to win the XFL championship. I believe that championship belonged to them. They just threw it all away in the final game. And so for the Defenders, you're looking at a situation where they're going to win the battle in the trenches. That's going to make their defensive performance, their defensive effort that much more impressive and that much more successful because the Brahmas already, with Quinton Dormady at quarterback, he's just going to be swamped by defenders, D linemen, and pass rushers the entire game. On offense, you're looking for that deep passing game to open up against the Brahmas secondary, which is weak. It could be a real messy scene in the Alamo Dome with the DC Defenders potentially proving that they are the best team in the XFL Conference and the Arlington Renegades are not, and that maybe the Defenders deserve to be playing the Stallions in the first week of the season. On the Brahma side of things, the bright side for them is the fact that there's a lot of hype around Quinton Dormady. Does he live up to the hype? Remember, Quinton Dormady, he was on the Orlando Guardians last year. He actually got kicked off the team for allegedly sharing the playbook with other teams. That later turned out to be false, or at least we think false allegations. I believe that it's false, but whatever. Quinton Dormady, he was on the Guardians last year. He was decently good of a quarterback. Granted, the Guardians were terrible, and we had really no reason to watch them all year. Now he's on the Brahmas. There's a lot of hype around him, partially because the Brahmas don't have much else to be excited about. But matching up against this defensive line is not going to do him any favors at all. You're throwing him into the hot, burning fire right in week 1, going up against this defender's defense. Hopefully he can connect with his top receiver and former teammate Cody Latimer coming over from the Guardians, right? He was on the Broncos a little bit at the beginning of his career. He's now maybe one of the better tight ends in the UFL. And so you could look at a situation where if the defensive line is swarming you and you have no opportunity to run through a positive progression, you can't run a full progression as a quarterback if you're Quinton Dormady in this situation. Maybe you build in some secure hot routes to Cody Latimer. Maybe that's the game plan where you just say, okay, we understand the fact that we're going to get swamped the entire game and our offensive line is going to get beat play after play, and I'm not going to have time to look for the deep throw or maybe look for the crossing route over the middle or whatever. I just need a hot route to Cody Latimer that 9 times out of 10 I can throw to and guarantee 4 yards. Maybe that's the plan for the Brahmas, at least until the defenders pick up on that and exploit that opportunity, and then the Brahmas probably have nothing. And for that reason, it could get very ugly very quick in the Alamo Dome. I have the defenders winning, and I have the line at about 13.5. The Brahmas, quite frankly, aren't good. They're stuck in this division where the defenders are incredible. They should have won the XFL Championship last year. They didn't. The Renegades did. They're also in their division. And then the Battlehawks should have been in the playoffs, and they weren't. So 3 playoff teams from the XFL last year, all in your division, and the Brahmas were terrible last year. They've made themselves a little bit better. They've improved at quarterback. They've improved at O-line. They're still nowhere near the world. They're still nowhere near the universe that the DC Defenders, St. Louis Battlehawks, and even the Arlington Renegades are in. So the Defenders, I have them winning by at least 2 touchdowns. It could be well more than that. We saw the Stallions early on in the season last year beat the Gamblers 42-2. It might look pretty close to that on Sunday, which disappoints me because I decided last season that I was going to be a San Antonio Brahmas fan. I don't remember why. I think it had something to do with the fact that Hines Ward was their head coach and their colors were cool and they were a new team. We hadn't seen them before, ever, in the history of the world. New brand in San Antonio, Texas. They love football down there. Hines Ward was their head coach at that time. Now it's Wade Phillips coming over from the Houston Roughnecks. The XFL Houston Roughnecks, not the USFL Houston Gamblers Roughnecks. And I consider the Brahmas to be my favorite team, and I don't think it's going to go well for them at all, and there is just no way for me to get around that fact. I have the Defenders winning by 2 scores, but it could be well over that number. The last game of the weekend is right after that one at 3 p.m. Eastern on ESPN on Sunday, March 31st. The last day of March, the Memphis Showboats are taking on the Houston Roughnecks, and the Showboats are very interesting to me. They have Case Cookus and his amazing receivers. They're looking to light up the world in Houston. They're looking to improve on the early portion of the season that they had last season, where they started 0-3 last year. The Showboats did in the USFL. They're trying to do a little bit better than that, and they have a real great chance to do so against the Roughnecks in this season. Flipping the narrative looks doable. You start on the road against the Houston Roughnecks, then you return home and play the San Antonio Brahmas, who I just talked about how they have very little hope for this season. It's very possible the Showboats start the season 2-0. Then you travel to Birmingham. Then you play your one game at the Birmingham Stallions. That could be a 2-0 Stallions team and a 2-0 Showboats team playing each other in the 3rd week of the UFL season. 2-0 or 2-1, which is totally acceptable. is definitely in the cards for the Showboats. They could get off to a very strong start with an opportunity to build that momentum leading into that major conference game against the Birmingham Stallions. They have their first conference game against the Roughnecks right now. They have a very strong possibility of going 2-0 and then 3-0 and having wins over the two other best teams in the USFL Conference, giving them that tiebreaker, at least for now, until they play those teams again at the opposite location. The Showboats are in a great spot. Their schedule is very favorable earlier on in the season. They have Case Cookus and those amazing receivers. The rest of the team is good enough. The Showboats can make some noise, and it starts this week. Remember, the Roughnecks have that very old school play style, right? They're going to slow the game down. They're going to try to run the ball and just play defense. I don't think they match up well with the Showboats at all, unfortunately, because the Gamblers of last season, they had troubles in the secondary. The Showboats have amazing receivers. They have an amazing quarterback. They're very exciting. They're going to be very fun to watch. They could just shred that Houston secondary all night long, and that's not a recipe for success because the Houston Roughnecks, they're trying to just run the ball and slow the game down. If the Showboats are scoring in 5 plays on every single drive on you because they're chucking it up for 60 yards every play, you're not just going to be able to run the ball for 7 yards with Mark Thompson over and over again and be able to keep up with them. It's just not how it's going to work. I believe that the Roughnecks are going to have to rely on the passing game at least a little bit here because I think they're going to be down early. I'm excited about that too. How does Reed Sinnett play? How does Jarrett Garantano play if he ends up starting for this team? In general, I don't have very much faith in the efficacy of Houston's play style, especially against a team like the Memphis Showboats or the Stallions or the Battlehawks or the Defenders. We can just keep naming teams. I just don't think the Houston Roughnecks are going to fit into this league very well with that old school play style that they are likely to employ. And so this game especially, I expect them to be down by 2 scores early. I expect them to have to rely on the passing game the rest of the way because of it. And I expect that to just be a recipe for disaster for the Roughnecks. I have the Showboats winning. I have 13.5 as the number. I feel bad about that because I have 2 games now. Maybe it's 3 that I just picked and said that they're not going to be close. I said the Battlehawks-Panthers game, it's not going to be a question as who's going to win. Same with Defenders-Brahmas. And in my opinion, same with Showboats-Roughnecks. That doesn't mean this weekend is going to not be exciting because, like I said, I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe the Roughnecks win by 21. And I would look like an idiot, probably. But I just don't think that's going to happen. I think the Showboats are going to win by 2 scores or more. It's a great matchup for Memphis, a great way to start the season. I think they'll come away with a victory. I think they'll do the same next week against the Brahmas. And then we're looking at an undefeated versus undefeated, 2-0 versus 2-0 battle for the crown of the USFL Conference, at least for now, until those 2 teams play each other once again in Week 3. Watch out for that game. But first, watch out for this game. The first conference game in the USFL with in the USFL Conference with 2 conference teams playing against each other. We're going to see both of them. We're going to see how they play, how they win, which one will win, and what that means for the rest of the season as we get into a situation where you're only playing 10 games. There's only 4 teams in your conference. You only need to beat out 2 other teams in order to make the USFL championship game. If the Roughnecks win, we're having a very different conversation about what the USFL playoff picture is going to look like. If the Memphis Showboats win, we have a little bit of a better idea. That's all I have on those games. Next weekend, though, how long have we gone? We've gone for about an hour and a half. This is a very long episode, and we have a little bit more to talk about here. I skipped the fact I had a brief segment about how Channing Stribling was signed by the Battlehawks. Kind of skipped over that. Channing Stribling, a great corner, amazing corner from the Philadelphia Stars, maybe the best in the league in press man coverage. He's now on the Battlehawks, and that is basically the only piece of information I have on that. But the Battlehawks now look that much better with Channing Stribling, who is, I'll just compare him to Richard Sherman. He's essentially the Richard Sherman of the USFL Conference, and or I suppose the XFL Conference now on the Battlehawks, and in the UFL. He's like that Richard Sherman. He's like that Patrick Peterson. Whatever corner, Josh Norman, whoever you want to compare him to, that is Channing Stribling, and he is now on a roster, and he's on the St. Louis Battlehawks. He's going to start. He's going to have an impact from day one. That's going to have a major influence on the game against the Panthers, and that's going to have a very major influence on the entire season for the Battlehawks and their ability to win a championship. Let's switch gears, though. Let's just take a complete 180, all right? We've been talking about spring football for 90 minutes, and now we're going to switch over and talk about the NFL and NFL free agency and all of the moves that we have seen so far. We're going to talk about the key NFL quarterback moves, and then we're going to talk about the teams that still don't have a quarterback and what they might do moving forward. And there are, I believe, 2 teams that have definite new starters. The Atlanta Falcons brought in Kirk Cousins. They shipped off their 2023 starter, Desmond Ridder. He's now in the Arizona Cardinals. He was more of an interim starter until they found their next quarterback. We all know that. But then they bring in Kirk Cousins from the Minnesota Vikings, and this move excites me in a lot of ways, all right? The Falcons have a lot of talent surrounding the quarterback position. Arthur Smith isn't there anymore to misuse it, right? Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, now Darnell Mooney as well, Rondale Moore from the Cardinals. In addition to that, they make up a much stronger and younger offensive core than what Kirk Cousins had with the Minnesota Vikings. Stephon Diggs left. He was left with Adam Thielen. Sure, he had Justin Jefferson and KJ Osborne, who is no longer in Minnesota, but you get the point. That was a great receiving core. But this team over here with the Falcons, they're younger. They're a little bit more athletic, besides Justin Jefferson. Drake London, he's exciting. He's a young player I really enjoy watching. Kyle Pitts, if used correctly, I believe still has a lot of potential at the tight end position. And then Bijan Robinson, of course, is one of the better rookie quarterbacks from last season. Now you bring in Kirk Cousins. Head coach Arthur Smith is no longer your head coach. And now the Falcons can enjoy the contributions of Kirk Cousins, who is in my opinion, well, in everyone's opinion, a much more capable quarterback than Desmond Ridder was and will be. That is just a fact. And so, ignoring the massive amount of money that they're paying Kirk Cousins, this is wholly and completely an upgrade. There is no downside to this, in my opinion. All they did was get a much better veteran quarterback. Sure, they could have drafted someone, but I think this is a great combination. You already have a young supporting cast. You already have Drake London, Kyle Pitts. They were all drafted recently. Bijan Robinson is now coming into his sophomore season, his second year in the NFL. And this team, despite its flaws, nearly won the NFC South last season. Granted, that's a terrible division, and there is no reason for us to be impressed by any team that wins the NFC South, especially in 2023. But don't be surprised at all if the Falcons are hosting a playoff game. By the way, it would probably be against the Cowboys, because the Cowboys at this point are just a perennial 5 seed in the NFC, where they continually don't win their division, which is fine, and then are the best wildcard team, and then they're playing against someone terrible like the Falcons, and maybe they win, but they probably are going to lose. And we're looking at a situation where Kirk Cousins, this is a team that was 1 or 2 games away from the playoffs, technically. Granted, they were a losing record team. They weren't good, but they're in the NFC South. And that's just the fact. That's just the facts and the reality of the situation. Kirk Cousins is coming from the Vikings to a team with a younger supporting cast, a more exciting supporting cast, a little bit more of a flashy supporting cast. And you have Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan Robinson all together on this Falcons team with Kirk Cousins, and a defense that isn't the worst I've ever seen in my entire life. I'm not suggesting the Falcons are Super Bowl contenders. I'm not suggesting they're going to be good, but this is a step in the right direction. If you ask me right now who's going to win the NFC South, my answer is probably the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but it very well could be the Atlanta Falcons, all right? This team very well could be hosting a playoff game against probably the Dallas Cowboys or whatever the best wildcard team is in the NFC in 2024, or I suppose in 2025 once we get to that part of the season. I'm excited to watch the Falcons. I'm excited to see when the schedule release comes out. I'm going to be looking for the Falcons. I'm going to see who they're playing in week 1, where, what time is that game? Is it Thursday Night Football? Is it Sunday Night Football? Because I'm excited to see how Kirk Cousins plays in Atlanta. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they're in the playoffs, and I'm very excited to see if they can get there. Another team with a new starting quarterback, although we don't necessarily know who that starting quarterback is going to be, we just know it's not Kenny Pickett, it's the Pittsburgh Steelers. They gave up who we thought would be their starting quarterback a couple of years ago, Kenny Pickett, who we thought would be their franchise quarterback even. Kenny Pickett is now the backup to Jalen Hurts on the Philadelphia Eagles. They also sent Mason Rudolph, their previous backup quarterback, who started the end of the year last year, tried to bring the Steelers team to the playoffs, succeeded, played against the Bills. That game didn't go very well, but the Steelers were in the playoffs with Mason Rudolph. That quarterback is now in the Tennessee Titans. So now they have no quarterbacks until, in the course of a few days, they trade for both Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. This was wildly unexpected. 3 months ago, when the Steelers were playing against the Bills, let's say this, at halftime in the Steelers-Bills game, when the Steelers were getting destroyed, if you asked me who the starting quarterback would be the next year, I don't think Russell Wilson or Justin Fields were the first names to come to mind. We knew that both of those quarterbacks were on the trade block, and there was a lot of hubbub around them potentially being traded. Were the Steelers necessarily a destination that you expected both of them to go? I doubt it. And now we have a very enticing quarterback battle on our hands. The storyline I care most about is not who's going to win this quarterback battle. It's about who's going to lose it. One of these two quarterbacks, Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, one of those two quarterbacks is not going to start a week 1 game in 2024. That is very, very interesting. Either we're looking at a situation where Russell Wilson's fall from grace reaches a new low and his career really falls from the high mountain that it was at when he was winning Super Bowls and destroying the Broncos 43-8 with the Steelers and the Legion of Boom and Pete Carroll and all those receivers that he had. Since they threw the ball at the 1-yard line against the Patriots, that Russell Wilson with the Seahawks that was playing for and winning Super Bowls now is turned into, it's the same person who just drove the Broncos into the ground in some ways, partially, and now is a backup on the Steelers to Justin Fields, who the Bears had to get rid of because they thought he wasn't the answer. I mean, that either that's the fall from grace we're looking at, or we're looking at the supposed next best thing in the 2021 NFL draft, where we thought Justin Fields was going to bring the Bears back and revive the Bears. He wasn't put in a very good position. He wasn't given every opportunity to do so. But we're looking at who we thought was the next best thing in Chicago, now becoming a backup quarterback to Russell Wilson, of all people, on the Steelers. One of those things is going to be true. Either Russell Wilson's fall from grace is going to reach a new low, or Justin Fields, who we thought was the next best thing, is going to officially fall out of relevancy in the NFL. One of those things is going to be true. And the best part is I have no idea which one will be true 5 months from now. When we start playing football in week 1 in the NFL, I have no idea right now at this moment who is going to be the starting quarterback. Will it be Justin Fields? Will it be Russell Wilson? Only time will tell. Whoever it is going to have a reasonable amount of weapons. The Steelers have a decent enough O-line. It's better than both of their previous situations. Better than the O-line they had with the Broncos last year. Better than the O-line they had in Chicago last year. You're looking at a situation where the Steelers have Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington. George Pickens, they actually have Van Jefferson now from the Rams. You may not know that, but Van Jefferson, that's one of the million free agency moves made. Van Jefferson is now on the Steelers. George Pickens is a young player. He's very exciting to watch. Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington. It's for both of these quarterbacks, it's an improvement. It's really a win-win situation. It's an improvement for the quarterbacks. They have a better roster around them than they did in both of their previous locations. And it's an improvement for the Steelers because I don't think they were going to be a Super Bowl contender with Kenny Pickett. They could be with Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. Maybe not this year. Next year, in the next few years, maybe you're looking at a Super Bowl contending Steelers team led by one of Justin Fields or Russell Wilson. So the Steelers, this excites me. This quarterback battle excites me. In the preseason, this is going to be very fun to watch if any of them play significant snaps in the preseason. But at the beginning of the season, it's going to be very fascinating to watch. What if the Steelers in week 1 struggle? What if that offense struggles? What if, let's just say, it doesn't matter who. Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, pick one. What if that's your starter in week 1? And then what if they struggle? Now you're talking, okay, are we switching quarterbacks? Because it's totally reasonable to suggest that Russell Wilson or Justin Fields could be your starting quarterback. How quickly do they switch quarterbacks if they ever do? What happens if they have to switch back? I could see there being a lot of drama around the Pittsburgh Steelers. In the aftermath of Matt Canada, Mike Tomlin is trying to bring this team back to relevance, back from just being just above the winning record cut line every single year to being a real contender to make a deep playoff run and win Super Bowls. He's trying to do it with one of Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. I could see there being a lot of drama around that, on top of the drama that we saw last season with George Pickens in some ways, on top of the Steelers fan base. This could be one of the most polarizing storylines in the NFL next season because you have two very interesting quarterbacks who should be very successful in Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. Maybe only one of them will find success. Maybe neither of them will. It's going to be very fascinating to see for a Steelers team that technically made the playoffs last year and technically has a chance to do it again next season in one of the toughest divisions in the NFL, that being the NFC North. So the Falcons, they bring in Kirk Cousins. That's exciting. That's an improvement. The Steelers, they bring in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. That should be, no matter which one ends up starting, that should be an improvement as well. There are a few other players. There's a lot. There's a ton of moves. But we're going to real quickly rapid fire through some of the other quarterback moves that I find notable. We're not going to talk about all of them because some of them no one cares about, other of them maybe we are interested in. Sam Howell moves from the Commanders to the Seahawks. Geno Smith might be their franchise quarterback, but Sam Howell led the league in touchdowns last year. Granted, he also led the league in interceptions, but a fact is a fact. This quarterback battle between Geno Smith and Sam Howell is going to be very fascinating to watch. I think they're on the same tier. If you're making a tier list of NFL quarterbacks, Sam Howell and Geno Smith are in the same spot. We thought after the incredible Seahawks season 2 years ago with Geno Smith, after the Russell Wilson trade, we thought maybe Geno Smith could actually be their franchise quarterback. Maybe Sam Howell is going to come in and try to change that. We just talked about the Broncos. Russell Wilson, he left the Broncos. Drew Lock was on the Broncos as well. Drew Lock was on the Broncos. He was traded to the Seahawks with that Russell Wilson move. To make room for Sam Howell, Drew Lock was traded to the Giants. Apparently, Daniel Jones, allegedly, is going to be the undeniable starter. That's what they're saying in New York. They're saying it's still Daniel Jones' job. Drew Lock is now there to make it a little bit more interesting. Another new quarterback in New York. Tyrod Taylor is going to the New York Jets to back up Aaron Rodgers. There shouldn't be any drama there. Tyrod Taylor, he's a fairly capable backup if Aaron Rodgers gets hurt again. Heaven forbid. We really want to see Aaron Rodgers play football in New York. Tyrod Taylor pads the depth there at the quarterback position just in case. Marcus Mariota. Sam Howell left the Commanders. Marcus Mariota is going to come in and take this place. That could be very fascinating. That could be very fun and interesting. Marcus Mariota on the Commanders. It's still going to be a rookie starting for the Commanders next year, probably. Drake May, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, pick whatever quarterback you want. We're not talking about the NFL draft yet. Marcus Mariota is now on the Commanders. That would be very fun and interesting if he does start, but it's probably going to be one of those younger quarterbacks, unless Marcus Mariota starts the season until Drake May or whoever else is the quarterback in Washington, until they're ready to take the starting job. Marcus Mariota and Sam Howell, but for, the relevance of the conversation, Marcus Mariota, I think, is a capable enough quarterback to bring the Commanders success and potentially some wins while teaching a younger quarterback how to do it. Maybe that's the situation we see in Washington. It's going to be a starting quarterback, or it's going to be a rookie quarterback starting, hopefully, for the majority of the season. But Marcus Mariota to the Commanders is fun and interesting to me. Mac Jones to the Jaguars. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. From the next Tom Brady to backing up Trevor Lawrence. That's a trajectory for Mac Jones. I hope he can salvage his career as a backup in Jacksonville. But Mac Jones going to the Jacksonville Jaguars was surprising to me. Now the Patriots don't have a quarterback, and we'll talk about, or they probably didn't already, but now they definitely don't have a quarterback. We'll talk about that situation in just a minute. Sam Darnold is going from the 49ers to the Vikings, maybe to replace Kirk Cousins. I sure hope not. I think the Vikings are in contention. They're in the conversation for a quarterback. With Sam Darnold is on the Vikings now. He's a great quarterback. I think he's very underrated, probably one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the entire league. Is he going to find success? I hope so, but we'll see. He's probably not the franchise quarterback or the answer at quarterback for the Vikings. Maybe that's their plan. We'll have to wait for an NFL draft to happen in order to see if that's truly the case. Gardner Minshew is now on the Raiders after Jimmy Garoppolo leaves to go to the Rams. Gardner Minshew versus Aiden O'Connell will be a fascinating battle. Neither of those quarterbacks I feel like are starters, but, one of them is going to have to be because I don't think the Raiders are necessarily in the conversation to draft a quarterback at this time. Jimmy Garoppolo was supposed to be the starting quarterback answer after Derek Carr left and didn't work out at all. And now he's on the Rams, his former division rival. He goes from getting to a Super Bowl. Wow. He did not win, but got to a Super Bowl, was up big on the Chiefs, had a real opportunity to win one with San Francisco. And now he's backing up Matthew Stafford in the same division in just the span of 5 or 6 years. Gardner Minshew versus Aiden O'Connell. That's a very even quarterback battle. I don't know which one of those quarterbacks deserves to win. Probably neither of them. But that's an interesting quarterback battle. We'll see if the Raiders can do anything next season and find any success with Antonio Pierce at head coach. They really found a spark at the end of last season. They really scared me. I thought they were going to take my Colts out of playoff contention. It was the other way around. Is Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell good enough to lead the Raiders to the playoffs? I doubt it, but let's find out. Joe Flacco is now in the Indianapolis Colts. Gardner Minshew leaves. Anthony Richardson's the starter, right? But Gardner Minshew leaves. We need to fill that void, and we fill it with Joe Flacco. To compensate for the loss of Minshew, as a Colts fan, this excites me. I'm going to miss Gardner Minshew. Really like him, really enjoy him. But Joe Flacco is now on the Colts, and that, to me, is very fun and interesting. Came from the Browns last season. Deshaun Watson got hurt. P.J. Walker was out, or really they just brought in Joe Flacco in the first place. And he revives that Browns team, who we were calling a Super Bowl contender with Deshaun Watson. Then he gets hurt. Joe Flacco comes in. Maybe they're still a Super Bowl contender with Joe Flacco. They ended up getting dismantled by the Texans in the wild card rounds of the NFL playoffs. But nonetheless, Joe Flacco, that quarterback, came off the couch and brought the Browns back to Super Bowl level relevancy. Now he's on the Indianapolis Colts. The Joe Flacco story continues in Indianapolis. I hope he doesn't have to play because I hope Anthony Richardson never gets hurt again. But it's a possibility, and it's a very exciting possibility if that has to happen. Jameis Winston is now on the Cleveland Browns. He's a very strong backup to replace Joe Flacco. So now you're looking at a quarterback room in Cleveland that has Deshaun Watson, Jameis Winston, and PJ Walker. That is a lot of depth. That is a lot of strength. Some very similar play styles there. The Browns know exactly what they're doing. They're going for a Super Bowl as soon as next year. Jameis Winston is going to give them the best chance to, or a better chance to do so, even in a depth, backup second string role. That's all the quarterback moves that I care about, to be honest with you. Josh Johnson, I believe, was moved. There's a few other smaller ones that just aren't really worth mentioning. The most exciting one from that list is probably, to be honest with you, I think Sam Darnold to the Vikings is the most interesting. Maybe it's Marcus Mariota to the Commanders because Mariota, I think, has a better chance of actually playing next year. But the Vikings, unless they trade up, are not in a position to get a great quarterback or a franchise quarterback in the draft. I don't know if the answer is Sam Darnold. It could be. I think he's very underrated. I think he could be very successful. Only one way to find out. So our last thing I want to talk about today is it's been an hour and 46 minutes. I've spent my entire morning recording this, which is I'm very happy about. I'm really having a lot of fun, to be honest with you. There's one more topic I want to go over. There are 5 teams in the NFL that currently don't have a quarterback. Yes, they have quarterbacks. They just don't have quarterbacks that are going to bring them any level of success in the 2024-25 NFL season. So the question is, who still needs a quarterback? What are those 5 teams that I just mentioned? The first one, of course, is Chicago. It was a heated debate this entire offseason. Should it be Justin Fields, or should they try to draft Caleb Williams? Should they take Marvin Harrison Jr. with the number 1 overall pick to help Justin Fields, or maybe trade out and get some value and just wait until there's a better quarterback situation or a more clear quarterback situation in Chicago as we lead into the draft? Fields is out. And most likely, Caleb Williams is in for the Chicago Bears. They traded Fields to Pittsburgh for a conditional 2025 6th-round pick, basically nothing. The question I have to ask is whether or not this happened too early, because even if they drafted, granted they'd be paying Justin Fields so much money, but if they drafted Caleb Williams, Justin Fields would still be a very strong and very capable backup who's used to the system, who we know is capable of finding some level of success with the Bears. They have the number 1 overall pick, but they weren't bad last year. They only have it because they traded with the Panthers. The Bears were 8-9 last year. That's not terrible, right? They weren't a playoff team, but they weren't light years away from it. Justin Fields brought them there. He could keep them there behind Caleb Williams as the backup. Also, Justin Fields' trade value would go up considerably once you get into the middle of the season, because what if you're the Falcons? What if Kirk Cousins, again, heaven forbid, hope this never happens, but if Kirk Cousins, for example, were to get hurt in the middle of the season, and then the Falcons just don't have a quarterback, they might need someone like Justin Fields, a backup on the Bears, to, trade for and try to salvage their season in that way. We saw that happen with Joe Flacco and the Browns. We've seen that happen with various other quarterbacks in history. And so that would be one of the narratives of next season, where you say, okay, maybe Justin Fields' trade value goes up considerably. They got it out of the way early. They got it out of the way in March. They got it out of the way as soon as they possibly could. There's no more intrigue there. There's no more questions about it. Now all that intrigue is basically just transferred over to the Pittsburgh Steelers when you ask the question of whether or not Fields is going to start while there. Also, the Bears got next to nothing for Fields, so they have no quarterback. Granted, they're going to get one very soon with Caleb Williams probably in the draft. If he doesn't pan out, then the Bears are in a real tough spot, because now you don't have your quarterback. Now you don't have any answers at quarterback. You have much less, trade value on your team. And then you have a quarterback situation where maybe you're paying a rookie a little bit too much money to do nothing for your team. Granted, I have a lot of faith in Caleb Williams. I have a lot of belief in Caleb Williams. I think he's going to be great. I think, assuming that's who they draft, I think he's going to be great. I think he's going to find a lot of success. I wish all the best for him. Fields wasn't the problem in Chicago, in my opinion. He's a great quarterback, and I think he's going to have a chance to prove that in Pittsburgh. This situation is very fixable. It's very solvable. Caleb Williams is just quite simply going to go to a Chicago Bears team that as far as number 1 overall picks are concerned, the Bears were only 8-9 last year. That's not atrocious. They're not the worst team in the league. They have the number 1 pick, but they're not the worst team in the league. It's not the worst situation for a young quarterback. We've seen Bryce Young basically get thrown to the wolves in Carolina. We saw Trevor Lawrence go into a very difficult situation in Jacksonville when Urban Meyer was head coach, and that didn't go very well at all. And Trevor Lawrence really lost a year of his development because of that on a very terrible Jaguars team. The Bears were 8-9. They were almost a winning record team last year, and they really turned it around at the end of the season. That's where Caleb Williams is going. He's not going to the Carolina Panthers. He's not going to the Washington Commanders. He's not going to the New England Patriots after they just, let go Bill Belichick and Tom Brady's gone, and the Patriots seem to be in just a woeful situation. That's not where Caleb Williams is going. Assuming he's drafted by the Bears, he's going to an 8-9 team with a reasonable amount of weapons around him, right? You bring in Keenan Allen. You already have Cole Kmet. You have some of these receivers. DJ Moore is the other one I was blanking on. So DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, this team isn't terrible. You just picked up DeAndre Swift. You have Khalil Herbert already in the backfield. The team around whoever's starting a quarterback is not terrible. Justin Fields leaves that situation. Caleb Williams could come in, and the Bears could have a much more successful season in 2024-25. They're most likely to draft Caleb Williams. I hope they do so because I think that's a great situation for Williams and a much better situation than a lot of other quarterbacks would be in heading to much worse teams. One of those much worse teams is the Washington Commanders. Sam Howell, who was maybe an interim starting quarterback, but he was shipped off to Seattle. He's likely to contend with Geno Smith for the starting job there. The Commanders did bring in Marcus Mariota, which is exciting. But as of now, obviously, we have a whole NFL draft to go through before we find out whether Marcus Mariota is going to be their starting quarterback. He won't be. The Commanders are drafting a quarterback. I believe it's going to be Drake May. Of course, this is all solvable. This is not. There's some, and we're going to talk about it in a second. There's some teams that don't have quarterbacks that are just completely screwed in every way. The Washington Commanders are not one of them. They know what they're doing. They're trying to build around a cheap, young, talented face of your franchise as the Commanders try to forget their past and just become a new team, become a new identity. They're going to do that around a new, young starting quarterback. I think it'll be Drake May. This is a necessary step for a perpetually rebuilding team. They're trying to get out of that rebuilding phase for the first time in 500,000 years and get back to the playoffs and get back to being a relevant NFL team again. This is a necessary step to do so. You got to let go your quarterback. You got to bring a new quarterback in. You got to bring in guys like Austin Eckler to really jumpstart that rebuild. And we'll see how close the Commanders can get to the playoffs next season. Obviously, they're not going to make it there, no matter who's at quarterback. We're just looking for some improvement. We're looking for this Commanders team to get closer and closer year after year, and maybe in 5 years we can have a conversation about them maybe being a wild card team. They're most likely to draft Drake May, in my opinion. We'll see if that ends up happening. The New England Patriots. We didn't know necessarily if they were going to draft a quarterback. I got a notification from ESPN yesterday that the Patriots are still in talks with potentially trading that pick. They might be trading away the number 3 pick in the NFL draft. Maybe they can take Marvin Harrison Jr. Maybe they can give it to someone like the Vikings or the Falcons who really need a quarterback. But now the Patriots really need a quarterback too. Mac Jones wasn't working. The offense wasn't working. Bill Belichick, in theory, wasn't working anymore. It was time to make changes, and they've done so. The Tom Brady days are long gone. We got to forget about those completely. Don't even try to preserve those with a different quarterback. Bill Belichick is gone. He probably should be. Most of this Patriots core is very different than it was when Tom Brady was there, when they were winning Super Bowls, and even towards the end of his days in the Patriots when they weren't. At quarterback, the situation is solvable. All they have to do is keep their number 3 pick and draft someone like Jaden Daniels, and then their quarterback situation is, in theory, fixed. Except it's not, because, the rest of this offense is just awful. Their best skill position player is probably Ramondre Stevenson, who was a good player, but if that's your best player on a team that used to be, winning 6 Super Bowls with Tom Brady, you're not in a good spot. Then it's KJ Osborne from Minnesota, Hunter Henry, and that really ends their list of quote-unquote stars. KJ Osborne, Hunter Henry, Ramondre Stevens, far and away the best players on this New England Patriots team. I feel terrible for whoever gets stuck on the New England Patriots. I don't want someone's career to get run into the ground, but I feel like it's going to have to happen to someone. It might be Jaden Daniels. I hope it's not. Maybe it's Drake May. Maybe it's someone else. JJ McCarthy, because Jim Harbaugh just seems to think that he's the greatest quarterback of all time. Maybe he is. I don't know. The Patriots are not a good spot to go. Caleb Williams has got to be super thankful that the Chicago Bears have the number 1 overall pick, because if he goes to the Chicago Bears, he's in a way better spot than he could be if he was on the Commanders or especially the Patriots. They have the number 3 overall pick, but they're probably going to be the worst team in the league next year. They have no quarterback. They have no solutions. They have no offense. An unproven head coach, although I do have a lot of faith in Gerard Mayo in general. It's a bad spot for the Patriots. Their quarterback situation is solvable if they grab Jaden Daniels or someone else, but the rest of the offense and the rest of this team is going to need a lot more work in the next few years. A team that is maybe ready to win and maybe get back to the playoffs is the Minnesota Vikings. They just grabbed Aaron Jones, a running back from division rival the Packers. Minnesota was not on this list 14 days ago, but Kirk Cousins got moved to Atlanta, a move that we've mentioned before. The Vikings then picked up Sam Darnold. I don't think that's going to be their long-term solution, but it could be. Yes, this situation is solvable. The Vikings might be primed to make a major play in the draft. If there's a major trade into the top 5, I expect it to involve Minnesota. Who would they trade with? That's a great question. The Bears need their pick for now. Maybe Arizona or the Chargers could trade out because they're not trying to grab a quarterback or a franchise quarterback. The Patriots are saying that they might be interested in trading away their pick. I would strongly disagree with that idea, but maybe the thought process is that they're not ready for a new starting quarterback, which is very true. That's actually, I shouldn't say I disagree with that. That's actually a very valid idea, that maybe the Patriots aren't ready to just draft Jaden Daniels and run his career straight into the ground, right? You don't want that to happen if you're the Patriots by any means, because then you waste that number 1 overall pick where you could have improved the offensive line, maybe brought in a key receiver, and you could just have a stopgap quarterback like Jacoby Brissett, who they just signed, or maybe Bailey Zappi, and just ride through this season and do what you can as you try to rebuild. And then, like the Bears, once they've gotten the roster around them more successful, now they can draft a quarterback. And that might be what we see with the Patriots, where we wait until they have a stronger and a more talented roster around the quarterback position before they draft a starter. That very well could be their plan. They very well could trade out of the number 3 pick, and the Minnesota Vikings very well could, pick up that spot. It's a very solvable situation. They just need a quarterback. Maybe it's Sam Darnold. If it is, I wouldn't be panicking over the Minnesota Vikings. I think Sam Darnold is very capable. But if they want a new quarterback, a young quarterback, a rookie quarterback, it's probably not where they are in the draft. I don't know where their pick is exactly, but I know it's not. They're not going to get an elite top 3 level quarterback unless they trade up to the number 3 overall pick, in which case they are probably getting Jaden Daniels, maybe Drake May, whoever is left out of Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels. If they draft where they are right now, it might be J.J. McCarthy, maybe Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr. as well. And keep in mind, that combination, whoever that is, whoever their quarterback is, whether it's Sam Darnold, whether it's J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., Jaden Daniels, Drake May, there's a ton of options for who could be the Minnesota Vikings quarterback next season. They would be throwing to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. They have Aaron Jones in the backfield. That's not a bad team. That's not a bad situation at all that the Vikings are in. The right quarterback could jumpstart the road back to the postseason. The right quarterback in Minnesota could bring the Vikings back to the NFL playoffs, back to the NFL postseason. It starts with the draft, or maybe it's already over with Sam Darnold. But if anyone's going to make a major play, if anyone's going to trade up to the top 5, it's the Minnesota Vikings. Another team that probably needs to trade up is the Denver Broncos. Russell Wilson. They broke the bank. The Broncos broke the bank for who they thought would save their franchise and bring them back to relevance after Peyton Manning's retirement and just dissipation of that Super Bowl 50 core of players. And Wilson fell flat. Then they fired Nathaniel Hackett. They brought in Sean Payton, and he was a little bit less flat, but still not a good quarterback and still not playing at a high enough level for the Broncos to find success. He's off this team with their only compensation being cleared cap space. This situation is solvable, although they also lost Jerry Jeudy. He's now on the Cleveland Browns. Most of the Broncos' weapons are gone, and a new quarterback, especially one taken this late in the draft, is not going to be able to salvage your season or really salvage your franchise for the next 5 years, right? It's time to rebuild completely if you're the Broncos. Maybe that means that you're sticking with Jared Stidham for a year, similar to the Patriots, until you have a roster around a quarterback where a young quarterback wouldn't be walking into just a fire. They shouldn't be walking into a burning building, right? Maybe that's why the Patriots and the Broncos wait to draft a quarterback. If the Broncos were to draft a quarterback, it might be Bo Nix, it might be Michael Penix Jr., maybe it's J.J. McCarthy, whoever's left out of that tier of quarterbacks. But the Broncos, they need to do something. They need to fix something, and they need to fix everything, really. I think it's better if they wait to draft a quarterback and instead build the roster around that position so that you're not having a repeat of Russell Wilson, where you're throwing a new quarterback into a burning building. I'm not an expert, but I'm pretty sure that getting thrown into a burning building is not good for the human body, and proverbially, it's not good for your football career in the NFL if you're going to a team that has no receivers, no offensive line, no help around you, and you're trying to do it all yourself, especially if you're, 24, 23, 22 years old, just out of college. You just came from USC, or you just came from Michigan and won a national championship, and now you're playing for this Broncos team. It's not a good situation at all whatsoever. The Broncos, in my opinion, should use their late draft pick to bolster some other part of their defense or their offense or their special teams, even whatever it is. Make the roster around your quarterback position much better, rebuild, and then insert a quarterback that might be able to have some level of success, and then maybe 3 or 4 years down the road, we can talk about a Broncos team that's in the playoffs. There's 5 teams that need a quarterback. The Broncos may not pick one up. Neither the Patriots may not either. The Bears are ready for one. They need one at this point. The Commanders are ready for one. And the Vikings are ready for one. They might have one already in Sam Darnold. Only time will tell. The NFL draft is just a few weeks away. I think we're about a month away. We've just crossed the 2-hour mark, which means that I just know that my camera is not currently recording. I think it has a 2-hour maximum on the amount of time that it can record. So you can't see me anymore, probably, which is unfortunate. But that's what I get for talking for 2 hours about football. We talked about the USFL Conference. We talked about the UFL games coming up this next season. We talked about the NFL as well. And that is all I have for this episode. If you've listened to this entire thing, you're the coolest person on earth. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. We'll be back next week to talk about the UFL and the 4 games that we saw in the UFL season. That's not all we're going to talk about. We're going to recap those games. We're going to preview the next week of the UFL. We're going to talk about the NFL again in some capacity, maybe some college football next week, although there hasn't been any groundbreaking news from college football recently. That is all I have for this episode. You're listening to the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. Thank you so very much. I'm hoping to be able to turn around and see a sunrise behind me. We'll see if that ends up being the case. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day. Have a great morning. Have a great afternoon. Have a great evening. Have a great night. Have a great rest of your day, rest of your week. Enjoy the UFL games this weekend. Enjoy March Madness as well, which is still going on. We got the second weekend coming up in 2 days now. I suppose I'm recording this on Tuesday morning. So 2 days away from the second weekend of March Madness. Boiler up, go Purdue. And I will see you all next week. Thank you so much for listening.